How about, there we go. Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the first session of criminal justice for the year. Representative Newman, good morning. How are you? All right. For the members who are new here, my name is Representative Roy. I'll be the chair this year. We're going to start off the year with an orientation session. We're going to hear from several state agencies and several lobbyists. They're going to kind of fill us in on what they do because we're going to see them a lot in this committee. So I encourage you all to take in as much as you can. Make notes for yourself. If you have questions for them, ask them a question. If you have a lot of questions for them, I encourage you to talk to them after. We should be completing today sometime around noon. Does anyone have any questions before we start? Okay. Attorney Head, are you in the room? He's hunting for a judge. Well, we'll just hold on for a second until he comes in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Richard Head. I'm the Government Affairs Coordinator for the Judicial Branch. I'm going to be joined, and they're on their way up the stairs, I think, by Judge Spath, Concord Circuit Court Judge, and Terry McCafferty, the Concord Circuit Court Clerk of Court. And I just wanted to talk in terms of opening comments, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about sort of the court system. You're going to be seeing a lot of me throughout the course of the session. And in my role as a government affairs coordinator, I sort of manage all of the bills that have an impact on the judicial branch. And a lot of that you'll hear me talk about is fiscal impact, because the bills are going to have impacts on the resources of the court system, affect the way in which we process cases, or the timing of cases, where there are a number of bills that are in the session that would require us to hear cases within a certain period of time. So you'll hear me say, I don't have a policy, the court doesn't have a policy position on the bill, but I will talk about how it impacts our procedures and our processes. I am here, I hope as a resource. If at any time anyone has questions, always feel free to reach out to me. You can call me on my cell phone, you can email me. And I try to be very responsive. If for whatever reason I don't hesitate just to keep calling me. And I apologize if I'm delayed. I did want to just talk generally about what our court system looks like. Judge Spath and Clerk McCafferty will fill in some of the details, but just to sort of talk through what is our system. We have two trial court systems. We have the Superior Court and the Circuit Court. Within our circuit court, we have three divisions that themselves used to be courts. They were all merged in 2012 into a circuit court system. So family division, probate division, and district division are all part of the circuit court. So a circuit court judge hears everything that is in circuit court. So they can hear probate cases, they can hear family cases, and they'll hear district cases. District is really the division that you're interested in. That's where criminal and civil cases are heard. And that's really where, the stuff that you are involved with is interacting with the judicial branch. The Superior Court hears the felonies. The Circuit Court hears the misdemeanors and violations. Beginning January 1st, last session, the thing called Felonies First was repealed. Felonies First changed our processes back in 2015-ish and had all of the felonies get heard in Superior Court. I'm going to pause briefly and just introduce Judge Spath.
Good morning.
And Terry McCafferty, Clerk of the Court. And in terms of our presentation as they settle in, I'm just going to give some background, and really what they're going to try to do is put a little sort of life in terms of what a criminal case is when it comes before the system. and when it gets into the court system, and sort of how does it get managed throughout the process. And so in circuit court, as I said, a circuit court judge hears cases from all divisions, and sometimes they're hearing them all in the same morning session. Whatever is coming through is going to be heard by that court or by that judge. And in general, what I'll lay out, and then I'll be corrected in about 10 minutes or 10 seconds in terms of what I say, and that's fine because they actually know what they're talking about. If you look very generally at what a circuit court system is going through on a week, and I have, like, this week's docket is here. It's 49 pages for the Concord Circuit Court. On Mondays in the morning, that's when you get arraignments. So that's, I'll give rough numbers. 65 arraignments are coming through. That's until 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock, that shifts to video. So those are the, 8:30 to 11 is live. 11 o'clock is going to be video arraignments. And we don't know how many video arraignments are going to be lined up in that particular morning. Video is set up with the jails and is frequently limited in terms of time because they're going from one court to the next. So we may have an hour with the jail, and then they're moving on. But we don't have a good sense of how many video arraignments necessarily are going to happen. And then Monday afternoon, criminal trials and the overflow from the morning that could not necessarily get reached. Tuesday morning, criminal proceedings, trial management hearings, competency, suppression, pretrial, sort of criminal stuff. 11 o'clock, go back to videos, and then in the afternoon, criminal trials. Wednesday mornings, abuse and neglect, full hearings. These are much more complex, or incredibly complex hearings. They take time, and they require sort of lengthy orders when they're ultimately, a judge has to ultimately write something down. Afternoon, juvenile cases. Juvenile has its own sort of procedural issues in terms of them having confidentiality issues. The scheduling of them has to be staggered because you can't have everybody in the courtroom at the same time. So there's some very complex sort of scheduling and just management issues associated with that. Frequently, these are cases that involve an arrest where police have a very limited period of time they can hold a juvenile. So they happen very quickly. They can be held for 4 hours and have to get in front of a judge. So you have some very complex both types of cases and scheduling and management of cases due to the nature of those. Thursday tends to be civil, and then Friday are state criminal cases, state police, and stuff that's generated out of the state system. Every day you have walk-ins. You have the cases that are not scheduled. Stalking, domestic violence, ex parte DCYF, guardianships, juvenile arrest, again, where they have to be, where police has to, the juvenile has to be before a judge within a limited period of time. And then, all of these are being held by the same, or being heard by the same judge. So this isn't, one judge for criminal, one judge for juvenile. They hear all types of cases. Within the circuit court, we have about, I may be off by 1 or 2, we have 42 full-time judges. And then we have on the superior court side, where the felonies are being heard, civil cases and stuff that's on the civil side, we have 21 judges there. In terms of rough numbers, in the circuit court, total number of cases that are being filed for those 42 judges is about 110,000. Of those criminal cases, we're talking about 51,000 to 65,000, depending on the year. So that's just the criminal docket is about 50 to 65,000. In the superior court side, where we have about 21 judges, it's 9 to 10,000 cases, criminal cases that are being heard there. Civil cases, we're talking in the circuit court about 5,000, and then sort of I could run through the numbers, but there's just a lot of cases and a lot of volume. So essentially every day people are in front of them, they're moving those cases, and then people are showing up again and they're moving those cases. And then in between, they have to write the orders, they have to do research, they have to do the other stuff. But I did think, and so I turn it over and ask Judge Spath and Clerk McCafferty just to introduce themselves, give a little background, but just, what happens in a criminal case in the court system, and what are the sort of steps that a criminal case takes once it shows up in the court system? So if it's all right with you two, I'll just ask you to introduce yourselves and just start
Sure.
through the system or through the.
Good morning. First, I would like to apologize for our tardiness. I've already had a morning docket at 8:15 and 9:15. I was able to sneak out, if you will, because my 10 o'clock case was continued. So I do apologize for the delay. I have been a circuit court judge for 11 years, almost 12 years. I have been an attorney for 38 years. I started my career as a state public defender, also served as a federal public defender, served 5 years as the deputy clerk of Merrimack County Superior Court, and then the 11 years before I was appointed to the bench, I was at the Attorney General's office. So I am pleased that I was able to have such a diverse background. I have recently taken senior status, which means I am technically retired, but I sit 1 day a week still in Concord. My first 6 years on the bench, I truly did ride the circuit, and I sat all over the place. In fact, Salem was one of the places where I got to know Representative Mannion, because he was a police prosecutor back then. And so it's nice to see you in another setting. And Terry will speak to you about her background, and then we thought we would take you through the life of a criminal case.
So my name is Terry McCafferty. I'm the clerk of the Concord Circuit Court. I've worked for the court for 19 years. I've been a clerk for 13, and I've been in Concord for 8 years. So as Attorney Head mentioned and Judge Spath mentioned, the circuit court's very busy. As clerks of court, we're responsible for the entire court, which, as you know, circuit court is family, civil, district, some probate. I don't happen to have a probate, but there's just a lot of cases, as Attorney Head mentioned. It's just a very busy court. We as clerks just kind of oversee everything that's going on in the court day to day, and it's busy, constantly running. We're very short-staffed in Concord right now. I have 4 full-time Court Assistant 3 positions open, which is the step up from Court Assistant 2 is the entry level. Court Assistant 3, I currently have 4 full-time positions open. So all of that work those 4 people do are now on the backs of the other people that are working there. So it's kind of stressful right now in Concord.
So can you just explain what the cases that you brought and sort of
So what I brought was some criminal cases, if anybody wants to take a look at them. As Judge Spath mentioned, this would, outline the history of a case. These are criminal cases. There are 2 different colored folders. The ones that are green are to grab the court staff's attention more quickly, because they contain criminal bail protective orders, which are similar to domestic violence restraining orders or civil restraining orders. So we have to pay close attention to them when they come down from court to make sure that criminal bail protective order hasn't been amended, that doesn't need to be faxed to the DV registry for entry or to be removed from NCIC. So that's what these cases are. So I'll pass them around if you want to take a look at them. You'll see the criminal complaint, the way it comes in. You'll see the sentencing order. You'll see any bail conditions. You'll see on this side, you'll see all pleadings, hearing notices, financial affidavits for time to pay. So they're just, that's the green folder. The manila folders are just regular cases, DWI, criminal trespass, Class A or Class B misdemeanor. So if anybody wants to take a look at those.
In the circuit court in the criminal world, we hear Class A misdemeanors, which means there is a potential for jail time, and those are the cases where if someone qualifies, they are entitled to a court-appointed attorney. Class B cases do not carry potential jail time, so people are not entitled to an attorney there. And then violations, which are generally like your motor vehicle cases. They can be the speeding, the handheld violations of texting, and those kinds of things. So how we first get a criminal complaint, which is the charging document, and it comes in it always comes to the court first, and it comes in either because someone has been arrested, they were bailed by a bail commissioner, who gave them a court date for a later date. Sometimes the police departments will give a person a hand summons, which will tell them what date they're coming. That is usually for something quite minor. The third way an arraignment starts is if someone is arrested and held overnight without bail, or with bail they are unable to make. And at that point, the court would hear that case. When Richard was talking about video arraignments, those are for the people who were arrested the night before. So I'll hand it over to Terry to talk about what they do when the complaint comes in. And then when we get to that first arraignment, I'll talk to you about what we do as judges at that point.
So when the case first comes in, whether it is by just, handing it over the counter by the police department, or they mail it in, or by email, we do allow them to email them to the court if it's for the next day or that day. The clerk's office enters it, assigns it a docket number, creates the folder, puts all the necessary paperwork in here, bail orders, advisement of rights, a few things like that. If they're detained, we don't assign an attorney up front. They'll ask for that on the record, and we'll schedule them for their next event with an attorney. And they should have, if they're detained, they should have a probable cause affidavit. If they're not detained, then they don't usually have that. There'll be a financial affidavit also if they're detained, and we'll assign counsel that day during the video bail hearing.
So at arraignment, people are not entitled to attorneys at arraignment. Even an individual who has been held overnight and is having that initial arraignment. What happens with those cases is, by statute, if someone is still held at the arraignment, then they are appointed an attorney. The attorney can request for an immediate bail hearing, so it will get reviewed very quickly. But for the people that walk in on their arraignment date, there are a couple of things that could happen. One is, generally speaking, the prosecutor will speak to them first to see if they want to work out a plea bargain at their arraignment. That does happen with some frequency for some of the usually for the lower type offenses. If it's a plea, I take it that day, and we go through the acknowledgement of rights form, and the person pleads that day. If someone wants a trial or is asking for a court-appointed attorney, I will read the charges against them, review their bail, and then if it's a Class A misdemeanor and I've determined they qualify for an attorney, the next thing that will be scheduled is a trial management conference or a case status hearing. If it's a Class B misdemeanor or a violation and the folks want a trial, the date they will be given that day will be whatever their trial date will be. So those are the files that I then hand over back to the clerk.
And we process it. We assign counsel. If it's a Class A, we send it downstairs if they are fleeing to pay their fine or get their paperwork. Fax paperwork to the jail if it's an arraignment. All of our arraignments are done by WebEx now. Nobody travels to the court. We had been doing telephonic or video for a while, but now everything is WebEx. We do a good amount of hearings by WebEx, particularly bail hearings that the public defender has asked for, which we schedule within 24 hours. Of course, they might be at another court, so we do all of those by WebEx, and the public defender and state may appear by WebEx as well.
So then the clerk's office is determining, based on the calendar, what the next court date will be. And with that next court date, if it's the Class A, it will be the trial management conference. Ideally, by that time, the defendant does have an attorney. As I know you're probably all aware, there has been a real backlog with finding attorneys to take the cases. So at this point, unfortunately, it frequently occurs that at the trial management conference, the individual still has not received their court-appointed attorney, at which point we explain and apologize, and we do have to continue them. But if the trial management conference goes forward, a couple of things could happen again at that point. The case could plead out. The prosecutor and the defense attorney at that time may have come to an agreement. If that's the case, I will take the plea at that time. If it still looks like it's a trial, then I get the information we need and what the clerk's office will need as far as the length of the trial, so we know where we can try and fit it in, how many witnesses both sides expect to call, and if there's any pretrial motions. Is there going to be a motion to suppress? Is there going to be a motion to exclude some other evidence? And those are all discussed and deadlines are given for when those motions can be set. When discovery, which is the police reports and all of the evidence against the individual, that all has to be turned over to the defendant or defense counsel. And all of those kind of, anything that's sticky, we try and take care of at that time. And then when I'm finished with that paperwork, then the clerk's office gets the file again.
Yep, and we send it out to all the parties. We give them a trial date, schedule it, send it out to the parties. One of the things that I didn't mention when we do the first arraignment, there's a lot of information, a lot of paperwork that has to go, packets that go to the public defender's office. They get a copy of everything in the file, as well as hearing notice. Everything in the file, as well as hearing notice, is also scanned to the jail. So it's very paperwork heavy, processing-wise for the clerk's office.
Then, when the notices go out for the trial, or also I neglected, anywhere along this way, there can be motions to continue that are filed. Maybe an attorney is in another court. Maybe there's some other conflict. So the clerk's office is also processing a lot more paperwork frequently in these cases, because it's not uncommon for that first trial management conference date or that first trial date to not occur because of a conflict, not a court conflict, but of the parties. A witness may not be available. Sometimes those things come up as well. But if we get to the trial date, again, at that point, the defendant and the state may have worked out an agreement, and there may be a plea instead of the trial. If it's a trial and they're ready to go, and they should be by that date, we will have the trial. If we have the trial or the plea, again, the court makes a ruling. Generally speaking, the court is able to make a ruling, and if it's a guilty finding, we will do sentencing right then and there. Occasionally, I may take a case under advisement if I just need time to think about it. One of the things I have been involved in training a lot of new judges, and one of the things I really impress upon them is don't feel rushed. Give this person their full day in court. And there may be something that you heard at the beginning of the trial that at that point you didn't understand how important it was going to be when they tied everything together. And so I may want to go back and look at my notes. It's rare, but occasionally I might go on a view in a district court case where there's something about an intersection and what occurred at the intersection, or at a restaurant and where this altercation may have occurred. And I've always found it very helpful to do that as well. But if the case is concluded and a sentence is given, frequently that will include a fine. And again, at that point, the individual is asked to return to the clerk's office, and then the clerks take over again.
And the majority of people don't have the ability to pay that day of court and ask for a time payment. So they fill out a financial affidavit, and then the clerk's office simply asks them what they can reasonably afford to pay each month, and then we give them a payment notice, and then we collect payment. Usually, we don't usually do 90 days full, at the end, where you say, okay, so we'll do 30, 30, 30, because by the time 90 days comes, they kind of forget about it, you end up with more defaults. So we just kind of do a routine payment. So again, that's more work for the clerk's office. They're calling in, because they can call in and pay it too. They're calling in over the phone. There's a lot of foot traffic coming in to make all those payments. So the fine payment piece, you think it's closed because they entered their plea or there was a sentence, but then that can take, on its own life as it continues. I need more time to pay. So the payment piece is another pretty good workload for the clerk's office.
And there's a miscellaneous other types of hearings that the court hears. One of them would certainly be a fine payment hearing. If a defendant has been given a lot of time and still hasn't made any effort, they'll go before the judge and we'll talk about what is going on. Other cases, there may be a motion to impose a sentence. An individual in a Class A misdemeanor case may have gotten 30 days at the House of Corrections suspended for 1 year, conditioned upon good behavior, which usually means they have no other felony, misdemeanor, or major motor vehicle violation offenses. If they commit those, the state can file a motion to impose a sentence, and then we would have a hearing on whether that previously suspended sentence would be imposed. We have competency hearings. If anyone, it can be the state, typically the defense or the judge, raises the issue of whether a defendant is competent, then he or she is sent for a competency evaluation, and then we have a hearing with the doctor and the court determines whether the defendant is competent or not. Extradition hearings, when someone has committed a crime in another state and is found, and there's a warrant out for their arrest and they are found in New Hampshire, we then have a hearing to determine whether that person will waive extradition and willingly go back to the state where they have the warrant, or whether they will challenge what's called a governor's warrant, where they can put the state through their paces of that this is the individual and this is the person who should be returned to that state. Non-compliance with bail conditions, we do in Concord are fortunate enough to have a pretrial services division for the county. And so if someone has been put out on bail and are violating some of their conditions of bail, maybe they were supposed to get a drug abuse evaluation or report every weekly to pretrial services and they haven't, then we would have a hearing on their non-compliance and what will happen then. Sometimes people's bail is revoked, sometimes tighter conditions are placed, and again, sometimes at that point a person may plead guilty and we take care of the case at that point. We do have a lot of motions to review bail. Frequently they are in domestic violence cases where an individual who has a no contact order and the parties do wish now to have contact, and those by law have to be heard pretty quickly. And the judges also handle search warrants. They just recently changed the process. The entire time that I was a judge, I was sitting full time. Terry was smart enough, and I appreciate it very much. She set 2 times a day when police departments could come in to have their warrants. And frankly, it was 8:30 before I started my morning docket, and at 12:30 before I started my 12:45 docket. And they would come in person pre-COVID, and I would review all the forms and determine whether they would get a search warrant or not. Now, there is now a statewide streamlined way they do the search warrants. And so one judge is assigned for a week at a time and handles all the search warrants throughout the state, and then they're not given a docket while they're doing that. So they're not trying to fit them in like I was trying to do and other judges had to do prior to this system. And so for all of those different motions, the clerk's office again has additional work.
It's very busy. Clerk's office is very busy. Public defender drops off their mail about 2:30 in the afternoon, and it is just filled with requests for to modify bail. Either the majority of them are criminal bail protective orders that the protected party wants to have contact, or they could be held on a cash bail and they want to review the cash bail. They want to be released on a PR bail. So, as Judge Spath mentioned, lots of motions to continue. It may seem that the case goes to a first arraignment, then, a trial management conference and a trial, but the case must be pulled for some kind of filing at least 3 or 4 times before it gets from arraignment to that trial date. So it's very, very busy in the clerk's office.
And Terry reminded me by talking about those, when any of those motions come in, after it's been processed, the judge then needs to review them and make a ruling. So we have what we call a signing desk, which literally, when I get to it at the end of the day, can be like this high just with criminal, and there's all the other kind of cases that you deal with. But again, normally during the course of the day, we don't have time to review anything other than our docket and emergencies that come in. I also neglected to talk about mental health court. Concord is fortunate enough to have a mental health court, and individuals who come to mental health court are sentenced to mental health court. And they usually have a suspended House of Corrections time hanging over their head in order to comply with mental health court. And it's one of my favorite things I do, to be honest with you. These people work so hard to be in compliance. Generally, a lot of them have a dual diagnosis of a mental illness and a drug addiction. So they are held to a lot of requirements. There's counseling, they have to look for work, they have to attend all of their counseling. They're so motivated, and it's a pleasure to do. But again, because of our docket, I do that at 12:15 during lunch because we just have to fit it in. But I think it's incredibly helpful. We have lots of graduates, lots of people who graduate, and it's one of the nicest things that we see.
And I'm just going to interrupt. You've been very generous with your time, and I know you have a very busy day, so I don't want to fill up anymore. I think what I would suggest, unless you had any final comments, is we would be happy to take questions, but we've taken up some of your time, and we appreciate the opportunity.
And the committee thanks you, Your Honor, Madam Clerk, and Mr. Richard Head for coming in today. I would be interested in discussing later the potential for setting up a field trip for the committee to be able to come in and see a session of criminal court, if the members are interested. I think that would be incredibly helpful.
And I agree, and I'd be happy to coordinate that with you at any time. Thank you.
And I also just had a couple of quick questions, and maybe I can knock out some the committee has as well. Can you real quick tell us why so many videos versus in person?
The videos are generally the people who have been arrested the night before, so they're being held at a house of corrections. And instead of incurring the cost of transporting them to the jail, from the jail to the court, we now hold them so they're at the jail when they have the hearing. So those are the types that are generally done that way. Occasionally, also on a competency hearing, the doctor may appear by WebEx as opposed to coming to the courthouse. And again, that's based on their availability.
Okay.
There were many more hearings held by WebEx during COVID, obviously, but even still, it's kind of continued because some of the folks that are incarcerated, I think some of the jails still have their own protocols, and if they go out, then they've got a quarantine going back in. So they prefer it. The folks incarcerated really prefer to be by WebEx rather than do the exit and entry process.
Okay, I got you. Another question I have is, you mentioned the difficulty in finding attorneys to take cases. Can you talk to that real quick about like why is that difficulty, and what, if anything, the legislature?
So, there's primary issue is just volume within the public defender's office and number of public defenders. I think others could speak more specifically to staffing. The public defenders are not funded or managed through the court system, but you've heard, I think, over the past year about the shortages in the public defender system. And then separately, there are contract attorneys that we will fund or funded through Judicial Council in order to sort of make up some of that. But again, it's a limited pool of attorneys who are available or willing to do that. So you have, sort of no control over the number of cases, but a shortage of attorneys, and, just similar to sort of the number of cases that are heard before the court, judge or attorneys can only manage so many cases at a time, and they're tapped out. So it's really a resource issue in terms of available public defenders and then available contract attorneys who would pick up any of the difference.
I know that in some other states, I think particularly one to our south, they used to at least have it so that as a member, bar membership, I think they had to take so many public defender cases per year. A judge could just look at an attorney and say, "This is yours."
And some of it is what is the ability of the attorney. There are a lot of people who would prefer not to see me showing up to be representing them in a criminal case. And so the bar does have a public service objective, but it is not tied specifically to the criminal practice.
Okay. All right. That's something that I find interesting. I'd like to talk to you about later offline.
That'd be great.
One thing that this committee deals with a lot when we make criminal law is fines. And sometimes you'll see a representative say, $50,000 fine. Obviously, that's beyond unrealistic. How often do you see people that end up having to be incarcerated because the fine was just too high? Or could you speak to a little bit about the fines?
Back in the late 80s, when I was a public defender, it was pretty common, to be honest, that a defendant would serve out their fine. At that time, it was $50 a day that would get credited towards a fine. Now it is $150 a day, but the court will not just send someone to jail for their fine. It has to be an ability to pay issue, and to be honest, any case where someone isn't paying a fine, in my experience, has been they don't have the ability at that time. So we'll try to stagger how much they pay. Community service is also an alternative to work off your fine. What happens sometimes, though, is someone may have been held pretrial before they made bail or until their plea. And we can, if that's the case, we can credit them $150 a day for each day that they were held pretrial. So you see a fair amount of fines taken care of that way as well.
Okay, great. And the last question I had, and it's kind of related to the fines, was what is the court seeing as far as the homelessness problem, as far as being able to track a defendant, to know where they are? Is that becoming an issue as far as?
I think that it's gotten better in some ways. Again, there is a large number of homeless individuals who do get charged with crimes. A lot of times the notices get returned if we even have an address for them. A lot of them don't have even an address. Again, in Concord, there is a homelessness resource center that allows defendants to receive their mail at that address. So that has helped with increasing the number of people who do appear. I don't know if you have a different observation.
I think it's a difficult issue. I think we've had, we've had cases where they filed a motion to continue, and the judges had to deny the state's motion to continue because the defendant is homeless. They won't be able to get mail. They won't know when their new hearing date is. It's really a difficult issue for the clerk's office. We just can't, you'll have a person that will, even if their mail goes to the 238 North Main Street address, that address is, the person has to go asking, hey, do I have any mail? And so sometimes after, I think it's 3 months or so, the resource center will send us back all the mail that people didn't pick up. So, homeless is, as you know, is tied to mental health issues, and I think it's a real challenge for the court system for sure.
And do a lot of the homeless end up in warrant? Is that?
They could, because sometimes, a lot of times if people don't appear on Class B or violation level offense and they're homeless, we wouldn't typically issue a warrant, but sometimes that's the only way we can get
Find them.
hold of them is a PR warrant, and then they'll, they get picked up, and then we try to get them a new date, but it's really hard.
Okay. Representative Bolden had a question.
I was just going to ask if you'd like to hand over the folders and we
Sure,
can,
sure.
and you need them back, I assume, before you leave.
Yeah.
I can't see your name tag. I should know it within a week or so. Go ahead. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you. So I'm just curious, I know from some friends' experience that the court system got stalled and very backlogged as a result of the start of the pandemic. And I'm wondering to what extent you've been able to sort of clear that backlog to get to sort of regular backlog as opposed to extreme backlog.
I think the backlog as far as COVID has cleared up. I think what I'm doing now is you'll see a backlog again in civil cases and Concord pretrial conferences. Pretrial conferences are speeding tickets, low-level things like that has fine amount. It's what they're called plea by mails. So if you get not a parking ticket, but a speeding ticket or uninspected vehicle, those things that have $62 fine, that kind of thing on them, we schedule those for pretrial conferences. But I've had to pause those. I haven't scheduled any yet for this year because I don't have the staff to process them. I'm going to be pausing the civil payment hearings, small claims where they've won judgment and someone's filed a motion for payments. I have to pause those because I don't have anyone in the civil department. I do not have a civil department right now. So those are getting paused, but because of staffing issues and not because of COVID.
Go ahead, Representative Muse.
Thank you for taking my question. I know that in the last couple of years, I've heard numerous times in the committee that there's also a staffing situation within the court system itself. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that something that's gotten better, gotten worse? What's the situation there?
I think it's gotten worse. I think that particularly as we saw post-COVID or during COVID is most businesses have increased their salaries, right? You saw it everywhere. Companies went up to $15, $18. My son works for Amazon. He said, I think their minimum pay is $20 an hour. So I think that's a big factor for the court system to try to attract people. we're starting our court assistant 2 position that starts, it's about $15 an hour. So there's a lot of, conversation around, well, that's what they're paying at Dunkin' Donuts, that's what they're paying at Walmart, and we try to have those conversations with people, but this is a different job. This is a career track. You can have a good, I started as a court assistant too at $10 an hour in 2003. So it's possible to have a good career track, but it's sometimes hard to reach people in that mindset because they're say to themselves, I understand that, but I need to pay my rent. People that started the court system, at that $15 an hour, unless have a roommate or in a relationship, it's really hard to make it on your own on that kind of salary. So I think that's why we're seeing reduced staff in most courts.
And there are really two aspects to the staff shortage. We have seen it, and it does exist throughout the system. So within the clerk's offices, all of them are short. We often will put out a notice of a position opening, and there are no applications. And that's common. Or the applications we see are simply, for that position, not qualified. And we do try with the lower level clerk positions to say, this is an opportunity. It's a way of getting into the court system, and you have the opportunity to advance. But salaries are difficult. And then the other aspect of the shortfall is we've just completed a weighted case study that for the first time since 2005 that talks about really for the cases and the number of cases we have, what should be the full staffing and what should be the full number of judges. And even if we are fully staffed, we're short. So we have two aspects of it. One is to get to the fully staffed aspect of it. And then the second is just how do we get enough staff how do we get the sort of the definition of fully staffed moved so that we can actually manage the caseload. And both of those are just sort of compounding on each other now. I think you'll see it in the Chief Justice's budget presentation, where both of the judicial resources and the staffing resources we're seeking to address, and you'll see some of that in the budget.
Have you tried recruiting at the State House here? Because I think $15 an hour is a lot more than we make, so you might find some takers.
We'll put some notices in the elevator.
It wouldn't be a bad idea. We could talk to you all day. It's incredibly fascinating. One more question.
Your Honor, do you have a drug court here? in
Concord District Court, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Concord District Court does not, but Merrimack Superior Court does.
Thank you.
As I said, amazing stuff, and I would love to talk to you all day. I will get with Attorney Head after and see if we can't arrange a field trip to come visit you in
Wonderful.
your environment. I think there's a lot to learn there. And thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Madam Clerk, and thank you, Attorney Head, for taking the time to come see us today.
Thank you all for
Yes,
for
thank you
taking
very
the time.
much.
Up next, we have the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence.
No problem, Richard.
And no worries about the time. We're going to just go as long as you need.
Okay.
Take your 30 minutes. Don't worry about it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Chairman Roy and members of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. I'm really happy to be here this morning, and hopefully it'll be informative, and I'm happy to be a resource outside of this presentation. My name is Pamela Keilig, and I'm the Public Policy Specialist at the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. And I have, our organization is the umbrella organization for our 12 member programs or our crisis centers. And I'm just happy to speak to you today about how we work across the state to address domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, child abuse, and stalking. And some of you have already received, hopefully in the mail, some welcome packets for the newly elected legislators. And I have materials for incumbent legislators as well today that I'd love to pass out at some point this morning. So I just wanted to kind of walk through a little bit about who our member programs are, the work of the crisis centers, and then the work of the coalition, and then highlight some key areas as well as touch on our public policy work and show how we can be a resource to you this session and the full biennium. So just to kind of start off, like I mentioned, there are 12 crisis centers and 11 shelters that provide services to victims and their families statewide. They serve nearly 15,000 individuals with direct service support and provide shelter to around 400 adults and children annually. So we're embedded in communities, and we work really closely with folks to make sure that they get the resources and services they need should they have experienced any form of domestic and sexual violence. Some of the services that I just wanted to highlight, so you know sort of what that looks like, is access to confidential advocates, emergency shelter and housing support, including helping find placement in transitional housing in our rapid rehousing program, as well as providing shelter for those fleeing violence who need immediate safety. Safety is kind of the umbrella word that we use when we think about this, because we really want to make sure that anyone who is in these imminent situations get the help they need right away. We also provide, the crisis centers also provide funding for immediate basic needs such as groceries, phone cards, gas, and rent, just to make sure that they have everything they need for stability in these situations. They also provide safety planning, which is a way to start making sure that victims and survivors think through everything they need in order to stay safe in these situations for themselves and often their children. We also ensure that they have connection to legal services, and this is important. You heard a little bit about the court system earlier, so helping with filing protective orders is a huge service that our crisis centers provide. We also conduct hospital advocacy, which I'll touch on a little bit more when I briefly go over our SANE program. And then, like I mentioned, connection to community resources. So they work really closely with different organizations in their community to ensure that victims and survivors have access to mental health services and other key services. And again, I'm also happy to take questions as we go too, if there's anything that I can clarify. I know it's a lot of information, so please bear with me. Then kind of putting that into the context, so like I mentioned, the coalition is the umbrella organization for these 12 community-based crisis centers. And so we, as the coalition, really try to seek to create safe and just communities through our statewide policy and prevention work. To really ensure that quality services are being provided to victims, as well as promote accountability to societal systems and communities. And so I think we, offer technical support to our member programs, help draft policies for shelters and things like that to make sure that we provide standard quality of care across the state. And we also work with a lot of key partners, including state agencies, advocacy and nonprofit organizations, other community resources and everything to make sure that we're looping everyone in on these systems to make sure that it really is a multidisciplinary approach and we're looking at this holistically. And so we also provide a lot of trainings to some of these different stakeholders, including law enforcement, sometimes the court judges in the judicial branch, state agencies, and so on. And so really just our number one goal is to raise awareness and really just be on the same page in terms of how we respond to these issues as a state. I think I just wanted to quickly highlight the prevention work, our SANE program and our human trafficking program, because they are very specialized, and then just go over a few other things as well. So I think prevention is one of the key things that we really strive to focus on as a state. And I think it's something that often in the wake of trying to respond to these really intense situations, we forget how pivotal prevention is to the work we do and actually ensuring that we're preventing violence before it occurs. So the coalition helps support our statewide prevention efforts through providing technical assistance to our prevention educators. Each crisis center has at least one prevention educator that works within the community and sometimes schools to really try to build critical skills with the goal of reducing the risk of intimate partner violence and child abuse. And so they it's like teaching like healthy relationships and just identifying signs of abuse and really working to create informed responses in communities and also strengthening community ties and values. So I think a community response to prevention education is our ultimate goal because then we're all really working together to prevent violence before it occurs and really act in the moment when we think instances of abuse have occurred. I think another thing that I just wanted to highlight, because we're coming up to February somehow, is that in New Hampshire we have Granite State Respect Week during Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, which takes place in February, usually the week of Valentine's Day. And so this is a really important week-long campaign that we do within schools and communities to kind of really raise awareness and, try to support schools and students through raising awareness, promoting healthy relationships, and then, of course, connecting teens to really critical resources in their community so that they can get help if they need it. And I just wanted to highlight that last year we worked with over 26 schools and 19,000 students and school administrators and teachers. And so this is like a huge program that I think is really important, and we're excited to see it expanding. And then I just, again, want to kind of summarize by just saying prevention efforts are critical to our ability to adequately respond to domestic and sexual violence in New Hampshire. Unfortunately, research shows that domestic and sexual violence has lasting health and financial implications. So again, we as a state also have an economic benefit from intervening earlier on in these things and can save a lot of money in the long run on mental health services, substance abuse services, housing and homelessness services, and so on. So we really are excited to have this opportunity to work with all of you to hopefully enhance some of these prevention efforts across the state and hopefully start limiting the scope of this issue. Okay, sorry, I know it's a lot of information. Hope you're also with me. So kind of switching gears a little bit to talk a little bit about some of the responses to these issues. So we have the Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner program that sits within the coalition. And this is the program that helps train registered nurses to be specialized in providing trauma-informed care for sexual assault victims who Yes, the same program, thank you, that present to hospitals after an incident of sexual violence. And so this is important work we do across the state with many key stakeholders through the Attorney General's office, law enforcement, prosecutors, and so on, and healthcare professionals to make sure that we have standard care across all of our hospitals and that we are really kind of maximizing the probability of collecting and preserving physical evidence for the potential use in legal services, legal system. So no one has to move forward, but it's just to ensure that that opportunity is there and that everything is followed through protocol. And then, of course, we want to minimize the physical and psychological trauma to victims. So ultimately, first and foremost, is ensuring the health and well-being of anyone who comes forward with these issues, but then making sure that if they want to, they can seek justice. And so we provide a lot of trainings throughout the year, and there are currently approximately over 100 SANE trained nurses working in New Hampshire, and they're located at all 26 of our acute care hospitals. And then we also train on average about 35 new nurses every year. So this is something that we continue to hope expands. And I think our SANE, the co-directors of this program are more than happy to serve as a resource should any legislation come forward that might intersect with these issues. And also to speak just about, sexual assault and sexual violence and what that looks like. And then I think just to for your information, roughly 300 to 350 evidence kits are collected every year in New Hampshire, and about 75% of those are reported cases, and the rest are collected anonymously. So again, someone who goes to the hospital does not have to file a police report. They don't have to say their name. They can file it anonymously, and then should they choose to go forward, then that's an option. So we really want to make sure that survivors first and foremost feel safe, that their health and safety is taken care of, and then support them if they move forward with legal proceedings. Another program I just wanted to quickly highlight is our human trafficking collaborative task force, or just the task force as I'll refer to it kind of moving forward. And this is dedicated to improving the statewide response to human trafficking. It does also sit within the coalition, but it consists of a wide range of stakeholders, including the Department of Justice, Homeland Security Investigations, state police, the U.S. Attorney's Office, advocates of our crisis centers, human trafficking survivors, and other key stakeholders throughout the state. It actually has more than 100 members. So again, it really highlights how we really like to work collaboratively and multidisciplinarily, if that's a word, on these issues. And then kind of the goal is to coordinate and collaborate to ensure that we have victim-centered and trauma-informed approaches and practices, and then also hold offenders accountable. There is currently a protocol being established through the Attorney General's office, and so I'd be happy to share that once that's available. But that's just a key thing that we're working on to make sure that there are a really straightforward and standard responses to these issues, and so that we can have these collaborative practices working really smoothly across the state when we need to respond to these issues. And I think another thing that the task force does is they are really excited and happy to provide education through training and outreach. So if this is an issue that you would like to learn more about, you can invite them to come to your community or an organization to provide just informative trainings. They in 2021 conducted over 46 trainings and reached more than 1,000 participants. And unfortunately, this is an issue that is relevant to New Hampshire. I think sometimes we think about it as a more national issue, but pull up my numbers from, yes, human trafficking. But so just to give you kind of a perspective, victim advocates from our 12 crisis centers assisted 374 human trafficking victims between 2017 and 2021. And of those, 309 experienced sex trafficking and 65 were victims of labor trafficking. So unfortunately, this is something that we do see in the state, and is something that we're working really hard to respond to. And we, similar to victims of domestic and sexual violence, our crisis centers provide a lot of similar services. So a similar transitional and emergency shelter, transportation, food, medical care, mental health and counseling services, immigration aid, translation and language support, and so on. So this is something that we really try to take a human approach to and really provide support where it's needed. Yeah. Okay, I'm almost there. Thanks. I hope this is interesting. So statewide policy work, I just wanted to kind of highlight this because this is kind of why I'm here, and you'll be seeing my face a lot. Hopefully I can be a resource to you all. My colleague Amanda, who is the Director of Public Affairs at the Coalition, is also another point of contact for you all, and I'll make sure that you all have our information should you have any questions or would like any additional resources moving forward. We again try to work really collaboratively with a variety of stakeholders from state agencies, nonprofit and advocacy organizations, healthcare professionals, law enforcement, legal representatives, and so on, as well as survivors, and of course you all. I think, like I kind of have highlighted, this is such an intersecting issue and it impacts so many different things. So it's really important that we engage with a variety of individuals to make sure that we fully understand an issue and how it can impact someone, as well as any policy solutions, how it will really be implemented on the ground, to ensure that it's an effective solution. And I think something that is exciting about working in this field is that it's one of the rare issues where we often have broad bipartisan support and also tremendous community support. So I just really want to take a moment to thank all of you for the work that you do to ensure that really effective and positive policies are passed to support victims across the state. And I am just grateful to have had the opportunity to work with some of you in the past on these issues. And I think we always, again, try to bring forward any legislation that has been vetted, that we work with various stakeholders. So, you know, we are always open to have conversations with folks and really make sure that we're not missing anything and that it's really going to have a positive impact. And again, like, we're just really grateful for the work that you do. So I'm happy to review anything that you have a question about. If you are wondering if it might have an impact on victims, again, we are here as a resource. And if we don't know the answer, we will absolutely find someone who can answer it for you. And kind of on that note, because of the critical work that you all have done in this committee and the rest of the legislature has done, we have some of the strongest protocols in the nation and laws in the nation. And often we are cited as a leader in advancing services, improvements in systems, and so on for victims, and are often cited in actual national in protocols as a sample of what we should strive for. And we're continuously overhauling these statutes and rely heavily on this committee for your support. So again, really excited to just be a partner in this work. And I just wanted to highlight, I won't go through all of them, but the Attorney General's office on their website has a list of protocols that we have in the state that range from, you know, a model protocol for responding to child abuse and neglect to domestic violence protocols, and so on. And like I mentioned, the human trafficking protocol that will be coming out soon. And so those model protocols are a great resource in terms of looking at, you know, what might already be in statute, but then what is already being practiced on the ground, and just making sure that everything kind of is cohesive and working together. And then I also wanted to highlight that there also was the newly reestablished Governor's Commission on Domestic Violence, Sexual Assault, and Stalking. And so that is another area that we really hope will help work in looking at these policies and identifying what new laws or statutes need to be revised. And so that's something that we are excited to be working with the commission on. And that's something a project that we will be really taking on this summer and fall to see if there's anything that we'd like to put in or that needs to be put in for next year. So we will definitely keep you all updated as the commission moves forward on reviewing, you know, policies and key statutes. But we might also be coming to this committee this year if there are items or pieces of legislation that might be on the agenda for the commission that we might ask you to retain or consider holding off until next year, just because we really want all of those stakeholders to have a chance to really review that legislation and make sure it's a viable policy. And I think because the commission has it has the support of prosecutors, defense attorneys, civil legal aid, Department of Justice, Department of Safety, and so on. So it really is, again, a broad group of people. So that was just, I kind of just wanted to plug that for you, that is a resource for you as well. Yes, Senator Carson and Senator Jody Nelson are on that committee, or the commission. Yeah, so thank you. That was an important piece I forgot. All right, so kind of shifting gears a little, I just wanted to highlight a few statistics and areas really briefly, kind of changing the tone a little bit of the conversation to talk more about the reality of some of these cases in the state, and just kind of talk a little bit more about what we mean when we say domestic and sexual violence. So fundamentally, it is a pattern of coercive behavior used by one person to gain and maintain power and control over another in the context of an intimate or familial relationship. And so that's kind of where we're coming from, is that it's about power and control, and it's about really like looking at that intimate and familial relationship. However, we have decades of research and practice that tells us that there are ways that we can look at those dynamics and understanding those dynamics that we can learn how to predict a lethal event. And I think that's important because often it's New Hampshire is cited as a very safe state, which it is. But unfortunately, the majority of homicides in the state are domestic violence related. So I think that's a really key piece to consider when we're looking at those statistics, and we're looking at what it means when we say New Hampshire is a safe state. Because there are ways that we can make the state safer, there's a committee called the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Committee, and they put out a report every 2 years. So we are still waiting on the 2020-21 report. So unfortunately, I only have data from 2018 to 2019. But I just wanted to highlight that 21 people lost their lives to domestic violence homicide in the state during that time frame. And I think there was recently an article about how the homicide rate had actually increased. So we're curious to see sort of how that looks during the last 2 years. And then I also just kind of wanted to highlight that unfortunately, that means domestic violence is a factor in more than half of all homicides and actually 77% of all murder-suicides in the state. So I think while we can talk about, I think that really just puts it in context when we say safety and we say that it's addressing the immediate needs of survivors. That's what we mean. Often, unfortunately, we're talking about life-saving interventions. And so that's why sometimes these policies can be so pivotal, because it's really trying to prevent the worst case scenario, which is that ultimate lethal event. And so I guess kind of moving to what we're doing about that, I wanted to highlight the lethality assessment program, which is a way that we can screen for these instances and just kind of help address those. So it's a brief intimate partners homicide screening tool and accompanying response and referral protocol for law enforcement that connects victims in these circumstances immediately to crisis center services. And so I think, again, just highlighting how the immediate response to these issues is just really critical. And part of that includes safety planning and making sure that they have the information and resources that they need to kind of demonstrate how important this program is. 54% of victims, so over 3,000 individuals from 2018 to 2019, screened in as high danger. So this tool is identifying cases where immediate services are needed. And so these are kind of areas that we can work together to, when we see policies and legislation that might be changing how law enforcement or other community partners and stakeholders are responding to these issues, making sure that we're not impacting this immediate response, and making sure that we're ensuring that these really dangerous situations are not going to occur. And then just kind of briefly wanted to touch on, and I promise I only have a couple more things. I really want to save time for questions too. So, but I think just really wanted to highlight, again, we mentioned domestic violence and stalking protective orders earlier this morning. And I just, from that same report, we have statistics from 2018 to 2019 to kind of give you a context. Nearly 8,000 victims filed for domestic violence petitions, and 4,200 civil stalking petitions were filed as well. And then over 7,500 criminal bail protective orders were issued in that time frame. So this is something that is occurring in our communities and requires this response. Yet only 38% of final orders are granted in domestic violence cases. And part of that is because only 12% of survivors have access to legal representation in New Hampshire. So again, ensuring that the enforcement of protocols and laws are being adequately made can really help address some of these issues, and making sure that when victims are navigating the system, they're getting all the support that they need. And unfortunately, that number is even smaller for stalking victims. So I think it's about 5% actually have about access to legal representation. So that's a huge area that we really want to focus on and make sure that folks have adequate support when they're engaging in this process. And I think it's important to say that because I think there's a misconception that it's easy to get a restraining order, but you can see almost a third out of the whole picture are the only ones that get granted a protective order. So the bar is extremely high. And while it's a civil restraining order, it has criminal consequences. So I just wanted to kind of bring that into the picture. And then, yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. And like I mentioned, we are here to help. We will always call you back if you have a question. And additionally, we want, like, if there's any questions that constituents have, we're happy to help connect you to crisis centers, make sure that they get the support they need, and really help understanding the services that are available in communities, as well as connect you to stakeholders and experts. So I know I kind of covered a wide range of things. I could probably do this all day. So I just really want to make sure that you know that we're a resource and we're happy to, talk through this one-on-one if you have deeper questions.
Thank you very much. And like our previous speaker, it's a very, very important and fascinating area of the law that we touch on. I just myself have a couple quick questions. Funding. A lot of the stuff you talked about sounded pretty expensive. Rent, housing, food, shelter. What's your source of funding?
Yeah, so we have several sources of funding. Primarily, it is federal, but we do have the Domestic Violence Prevention Program, which is through the state budget. So that is something that we will be addressing this year with the budget request. And so that is about $1.27 million every year. And that goes to direct services. So managing the crisis hotline, like I mentioned, emergency shelter, legal services, and so on. So really providing the immediate direct services to survivors.
Great. Okay. The SANE program. Do they also conduct? They're trained to do the SANE interviews where there's a criminal case. If you could just quickly explain that to the committee. I mean, several of us might know what it is, but.
Yeah, so the SANE program, so in addition to serving as a resource in emergency departments where they primarily operate, they also do training for all healthcare professionals as well to make sure that if there isn't a SANE nurse present, they can do that. But these are folks who are especially trained in the area of sexual assault and how to actually not only document and collect evidence, but speak to that evidence. So often they might serve as witnesses in court proceedings, expert witnesses and so on, and really just help make sure that that process is being followed. They work really closely with the law enforcement and state lab to make sure that kits are being processed and things like that. I don't know if...
I was thinking more about, in other words, when you have a victim who's a child,
Oh, yes.
oftentimes it's very intimidating to have a room full of people. So the SANE interviewer would do.
Yeah, and that's one area that we really hoping to expand on because I think all of our SANEs are trained in adult and adolescent and pediatric care, but that is one area where we hope to have more specializations. Right now, we work most closely with the Laconia Child Advocacy Center, and that was sort of a pilot program to bring in that work there, and that's something that we're hoping to see expand across the state. But yes, we see, unfortunately, a lot of child victims in those cases, and SANE nurses work really closely to make sure that that's being adequately addressed.
Okay. That's all I had for questions. And the committee has a few themselves. I have to step out to introduce a bill. I just wanted to thank you so much for coming in and tell the members of the committee this is a great resource. Several years ago, I myself had a bill having to do with firearms, and the coalition advised me that it could be problematic for some victims. I listened to them, I looked into it, and they were absolutely correct, and I pulled the bill. So it's very important that you use them as a resource, at least to get some background information on what the second and third order of effects some of your bills may have. And I'm going to turn it over to the Vice Chairman, and I have to step out. Thank you.
Thank you. My question was, I guess, about the woman who was shot, I want to say a year or two ago by the person, she'd attempted to get a restraining order against, and it was rejected, and then he shot her a few weeks later. I don't want to take up a lot of time, but it's my understanding that there's some debate as to whether or not the ruling was in compliance with the law, and since we make the laws, did you have any, does your organization have any commentary on that? Are there any changes you'd like to see in the law?
Yeah, a task force was a result of that incident, and there was also a committee that reviewed that as well within the judicial branch. I don't think our friends are here anymore. But so, and then that was sort of the basis for what helped reestablish the Governor's Commission. So that is something that we are discussing at the commission to kind of look at more closely and address. And I'd be happy to kind of chat more one-on-one with you to give you a little bit more information on that, because there's a lot in that discussion in terms of just how different folks have interpreted the law and how that is then playing out in the courtroom. So I'd definitely be happy to talk more with you about that.
I actually have a question that's a follow-up from Chairman Roy. He had asked about funding.
Mhm.
And this is something I actually wanted to ask you a lot last year, and I never did. In some states, and because we deal so much with fines in this committee, in some states, the fines that are put on the actor, that money is given to the domestic violence state program, and that is used to help reimburse the victim for expenses that they have had that would not have otherwise incurred to them. Is that something that New Hampshire also does? So some of the money that you do have comes from that. Can you
Yes.
explain how that works a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a really unfortunate incident that occurred in 2013, 2014, where a young boy was shot and killed during a supervised visitation, and that resulted in the formation of Joshua's Law. And I'd be happy to talk more about that history at a later date. But basically, Joshua's Law resulted in applying a fee to domestic violence cases, and that goes into a special fund that crisis centers get. I think it's about $40,000 that gets split across the crisis centers, and that is really critical funding in terms of providing it's flexible. So a lot of times it goes to, medical care. So really allows crisis centers to meet the direct needs of survivors that may not be available in more restricted funding from our federal grants. So replacing locks on doors, transportation, like maybe someone's car needs to be serviced and so that they can, get to work, providing childcare, emergency dental work is unfortunately something that we see a lot, and so on. So Joshua's Law is a really key resource. And we have a little bit more information in terms of the variety of services. So I'd be happy to share that with you, so you can see sort of why it is so important. And so that's something that started in 2014 and we are able to use today.
Okay, great. Representative Newell.
I actually work at a transitional shelter. It's in Massachusetts as well. So sometimes we do have people who come who are in domestic violence situation. I'm curious, especially, the way that you were talking about this is a holistic issue and it intersects with a variety of different things. It absolutely intersects with housing. And so I was wondering if you could just kind of give some insight onto the availability of shelters. Are people placed in a shelter like mine, which is a transitional shelter that is available for that, or, but does not focus specifically on that? Is there availability of specifically domestic violence shelters? And I just wanted to know kind of how that intersects with housing. And of course, we're having, shelter beds are short as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your question. I'm just going to pull up some stats. So we, like I mentioned, we have 12 crisis centers, but we have 11 shelters in New Hampshire. The reason being is one of our crisis centers is co-located at the University of New Hampshire. And so we don't have a shelter located there, but they partner with Haven, which is the closest crisis center to them, should that be a need. And so our shelters are emergency shelters, so really anyone who is in imminent danger, really fleeing violence. However, if the shelter is full, I want to say there are 138 beds available across the state. And like I mentioned, we shelter around 400 adults and children every year, or who are in shelter. And I think there's kind of a lot of things. So I definitely love to talk more with you about it because it's kind of a deep issue. But I think the key thing is when someone is in emergency shelter, the immediate next step is to try to see how we can support them in accessing transitional or permanent housing, so that we can make sure that more people can cycle through the shelter as needed. So we have our transitional housing program and our rapid rehousing program, and we're also part of the Bureau of Housing Support's continuum of care. So we do a lot of work across the state to look at different housing options, and just making that available. I think, again, they're emergency shelters, so there may be a domestic violence victim who has been removed from that situation, and maybe like several years down the road may have access to a non-emergency shelter. But I'd be happy to talk more about those dynamics, and because it's a really interesting topic for sure.
Representative Reed?
So I've been hearing that there's a backlog on. If that is the case, what's the potential impact?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I'm sorry, I can't see you very well, but so to kind of address that really quickly, there actually is now a tracking system. So the Sexual Assault Advisory Board and the state lab worked on getting a grant to help sort of expedite that process, and now all new kits, it started with a pilot program in certain hospitals, but now statewide they're slowly rolling out all kits that will have a USB code on it, so that they can track the kit process and have a better ability to make sure that things are moving through the system. And I know that they've made significant progress on that backlog. And so again, I think it's kind of a complex issue, so I'd be happy to chat with you more about that and just give you a little bit more insight.
Thank you. Representative Svitek?
Thank you. I have a couple of quick questions. You spoke of a handout.
Yes.
Will that have something, I don't know about the SANE program. Is that referred to in your handout?
I didn't include that, but I have a copy with me today. I'd be happy to give to you, and I can also make sure that I send it out to the committee if that's something that everyone would like a copy of.
I'd sure like it. The other question is more general. Are you a growth industry, or is this increasing, or are we getting getting this problem under control? Your presentation is very discouraging.
Sorry. That's a great question, and unfortunately, I don't have a straightforward answer. One of the issues that the commission, the Governor's Commission, is also trying to look at is our statewide data and tracking systems. Right now, a lot of that isn't collaborative. So I know what the number of victims that we serve through our crisis centers, and that's the picture that I have. But unfortunately, we don't have a full picture on the true scope of it, because as much as we wish everyone would come to our crisis centers, that unfortunately isn't the case. So we only serve probably, unfortunately, a small portion of those who really need services. And so, and that's why you all can be a great help in making sure that folks get referred to your local crisis center. But I think that's an issue that the commission is really trying to tackle to get a better sense of the full scope of the issue. I think there's a lot of things that we have made significant progress on, and a lot of that is due to the laws and protocols that have been established with support of this committee and the legislature. But I think then, there's always more work that unfortunately needs to be done in terms of raising awareness and identifying these issues.
Everybody good? All right. Very informative. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So we I've had a couple of people ask if we could just take 5 minutes. So we're going to recess for 5 minutes, and then whenever we come back, we are going to hear from Commissioner Hanks. So we will be back at 11, like 32-ish. All right, everybody, we're going to be starting about 10 seconds. Okay.
You might have Amy's. I'll get Amy's. Do you have one for Amy? Yes. Okay.
All right. All right, at this time, we will resume our orientation for the Criminal Justice Public Safety Committee meeting. Commissioner Hanks? Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Helen Hanks. I am the Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Corrections. I've had the privilege to be in state service. I'm in my 20th year. I was honored to be nominated as Commissioner in November of 2017 and served a 4-year term and was renominated and confirmed in October of 2021. I share that with you because I think it gives you depth of awareness of my time with the department, and that I spent most of the beginnings of my career managing the medical and forensic services that we deliver across the department, and then changed that role in 2014 when I was the assistant commissioner. There will be a constant theme you've heard this morning, at least from the judiciary to the department. Our number one challenge at the agency is staffing, remains to be staffing, primarily our corrections officers, but also our nursing staff and our mental health clinicians. I've provided a PowerPoint that should be each of your locations, and we'll send that out electronically as well, and advise you that our last published annual report of FY21 is a robust document that is intended to tell you a lot more than I can tell you in the time that I'll have here with you today, specifically in the diversity of treatment and programming and other data points that you may find relevant. And if you don't find it in there, to my right is Jane Graham, our departmental legislative liaison, and she'll help and I will help navigate your request. And we'll make sure you have our contact information. We rebranded our vision as an agency on the first page of the PowerPoint because I think it's important that our goal is to have a fully staffed workforce where everyone is professionally developed. And yes, we do expect that individuals who are in our care and custody are provided an opportunity for progressive rehabilitation. And we do want state-of-the-art facilities in order to do that. On the following page, I provide really just some images of the different facilities that we run. I do want to make it clear for members, the Department of Corrections, the New Hampshire Department of Corrections does not have oversight of the county jails. Those are distinctly managed by each county, and they have a county superintendent and a county delegation. So if you have a county jail question, please see your county and they will assist you. The county superintendents do have an association, and Superintendent Chris Brackett is their currently elected president, and I'm sure he can assist in your county jail questions. I cannot. The New Hampshire State Prison for Men, which is our largest facility, is here in Concord. Its foundation is as old as 1878. 1878. That is an important number. We ask every year for a significant portion of the capital budget appropriation to maintain that facility. It is designed in a campus-style format. It is the least efficient format to manage in a correctional facility. It is a challenge with our challenge in staffing. It is a challenge just based on the age of the infrastructure. I don't want to take away, there is some really interesting correctional infrastructure there. And yes, if we're fortunate enough, my hope is that you will support in building a new facility, we can turn it into a museum, because there are sections that definitely belong in a museum, especially the rats. We built a new facility for women. We had leased a facility in Goffstown. We were fortunate to move into that facility in April of 2018 with final construction elements that occurred and were completed, that literally the Public Works checklist in 2019. All of these facilities, we would certainly open up a tour opportunity to any member of the legislature. We will put you through a criminal background check and other elements that we put everyone through. So bear with us as we go through that process. We run prisons. We have 3 transitional housing units that are, one is in Manchester, 2 are here in Concord. One of the facilities in Concord is dedicated to women, and we have 1 transitional work center for men here in Concord. The transitional work center for women was built on the campus of the new correctional facility for women. And again, I think seeing the men's prison first and the women's prison last will give you a good sense of the differences in correctional design. On the following page, I think it's important, we've had these conversations with previous members of the legislature, and I will expect that new members of the legislature will ask these questions going forward. To give you a base information of the self-reported, it is self-reported race collected at time of booking. It is mostly a group of white Caucasian individuals incarcerated in our facilities. Our census in the prisons yesterday were 1,880 individuals. On the following page, we incarcerate mostly biological men. Sorry, men in the room. 93% of the people incarcerated are males, biological males in the state of New Hampshire. Our census for women was as low as, I think it was 100 yesterday. And we built the facility that I referenced to the capacity of 224. At the time that that facility was authorized through the capital budget appropriation process, there was a plan to ensure that we could increase the capacity there. And I'm happy that we have never had to come back and ask to increase the capacity at that women's prison, and hence we're using half of it. On the following page, I give you, and I can provide these by gender. I did it as a higher overview, cognizant that we wouldn't have a lot of time. I could spend probably 8 hours just giving you historical education and current education on corrections. It is my passion. But these are the age ranges of the people, the adults that are under our care and custody. And you'll see that mostly they're between the ages of 30 and 49. We do not have any adjudicated minors. Those adjudicated minors would be in the care and custody of the Youth Detention Center until they turned the age of 18, at which time we would take over custody of them. Because of the Prison Rape Elimination Act that came from the federal government, we did change the law to assure we were compliant with that. I do want you to know that term, Prison Rape Elimination Act, because as a correctional agency, we have to pass an audit of 3 sites every year. If we do not, we affect the state's ability to receive federal grant funding. So we take that charge seriously and have passed our audit. And we like to tell the state of New Jersey, we were the first to pass the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act when it started. I think it was 2016, and we're still in a debate with New Jersey, which we will win. On the following pages are the basic crime breakouts. If I gave you a chart of all of the RSA violations, it would simply tell you that 1/3 of the men in New Hampshire who are incarcerated, adult males, are incarcerated for violations associated with sexual assault. Aggravated sexual assault, felonious sexual assault, 1/3 of the population of men incarcerated in New Hampshire fit that criteria. They're in the section of the 64% personal. Personal includes violent. Also in that largest blue bar on that circle are attempted murder, things of that nature, those violent, volatile crimes. Approximately 600 people are incarcerated associated with violations under the Controlled Drug Act. So when our partners, the judiciary, were talking about mental health courts, the other implementation of statewide drug court has made a large and positive impact on reducing individuals' incarceration associated with substance use disorder, as well as their mental health courts with individuals with severe and persistent mental illness. So we love drug court. The department loves mental health court. And I know there are a few veterans courts, and we greatly appreciate those opportunities that the judiciary has created to divert people from incarceration if it's safe for public safety. On the following slide, I think another important area is to talk about the population of those incarcerated. New Hampshire has been proactive as far back as 2014, and we've seen a 26% decline in the incarcerated population in the state of New Hampshire, the adult population. And that is because of the things I just referenced, the implementation of statewide drug court, looking at mental illness as a root of the criminogenic behavior, and can there be other alternatives that can be safely managed through whether it's probation, diversion in general, or other opportunities if it is, again, at the advantage of it doesn't affect adversely, public safety. Public safety is the most important aspect, and if it can't be managed that way, then the sentence structure will result in an incarcerated stay. We are also thankful that the population decreased because our staffing decreased. And we were able to shut down the second floor of a large general population housing unit back in July of 2021 that reduced our post requirements at the men's prison by 14. That's significant. We also shut down a 56-bed general population unit at women's and reduced that security post requirement by 5 daily. So you add that over time without those reductions, with the reduction of our staffing, we've had a very challenging last several years. On the following slide after the population reduction, I did show you on purpose the population by maximum sentence, because in New Hampshire we have a minimum sentence and a maximum sentence. That minimum sentence, minimum parole release date is never a guarantee, but this maximum is a guarantee. The part I footnote at the bottom is it doesn't account for people's consecutive sentence, because someone can be incarcerated on multiple consecutive sentences, and we can't possibly calculate that because we don't know when they're going to achieve parole to that. We don't know when they're going to achieve parole to that consecutive sentence. So this is the best snapshot we can give you with some consistency, and can continue to do that moving forward. Staffing challenges. I told you we were going to talk about that on the following slide. The security vacancy rate in October was 39%. It's closer to 50% today. And I'm talking specifically in the area of corrections officers. I'm not talking, when I say 50%, I'm not talking about corporals, sergeants, lieutenants, captains. We have a whole rank and file within our organization. It's corrections officers. I heard someone reference, and I think it was the clerk from Concord, say that Amazon's offering $20 an hour. The Department of Corrections, as a starting corrections officer, offers just under $22 an hour. When we ask people to work in a prison from 1878, 24 hours a day with individuals who've committed felonies, a majority of them sex offenders. So my charge as commissioners to try to rectify that minimum starting baseline and advocate for a change for our corrections officers in trying to draw in qualified candidates who are expected to maintain humane supervision and security in our 24-hour, 7-day-a-week correctional institutions. Another unique area that people don't think about, corrections is really a community of all professionals behind a brick wall with razor wire. We need chefs, we need clinicians, we need case managers, we need clerical support. We need it just as the community needs it. We need recreational therapists, but we're having a hard time also recruiting chefs to help manage our kitchens. And we're fortunate to have residents who want to work in our kitchens, but we do need chefs to help manage the quality and delivery of those food service. The other area that is not uncommon, and many of you both professionally and through your legislative experience, is the area of registered nurses and other nursing disciplines. We have a 27% vacancy rate in that area. And then mental health clinicians, we are competing with everybody who needs a mental health clinician, licensed alcohol drug counselor, clinical mental health counselor, licensed social worker. We are competing with our community mental health centers, our emergency rooms, you name it, we're competing with them. And we have a 38% vacancy in those positions as well. Really positive presentation, I know. Well, the fortunate part for the state is the Department of Corrections, we endeavor to persevere, and maybe to our own deficit, but we persevere every day. And I have some of the strongest, most dedicated correctional staff that I could ask for and the state could ask for. So I just want to take a minute to appreciate them. I show you the staffing trends on the next following pages. I break out security staff versus what we call our civilian staff, those other people not wearing the corrections uniform on a daily basis. And you should notice on FY22, we experienced, like many other people experienced, coming out of the height of COVID, a mass exodus of individuals who deservedly retired. They had greater than 20 plus years of correctional experience and said, wow, those were the toughest 2 years of my life. I'm going to go do something else. And I shook their hand and thanked them for their service. We have hired to date, just the update at the end, 17 corrections officer trainees. That number is too small, but we continue to persevere again in different unique ways than we have in the past as a corrections agency, and I'll talk about those when we get to the next slide. So if you know somebody who's interested in corrections, we will give them a tour, we will hire them if they meet the minimum standards, and we will give them a long and enduring career, so please refer them to my department. On the following slide, civilian staffing trends, it did the same thing in FY22 as far as the retirement and really actually people choosing. Theirs was a little different. That column called termed, it doesn't mean we asked them to leave. It means they separated or terminated their relationship with us. That demonstrates the competitiveness of community people or organizations who are recruiting our employees to go work in their organizations at a higher rate of pay with a lot less stress than you would experience in a correctional environment. And we do a lot of exit interviewing, so we learned a lot over the last several years about what we can do differently and what we hope to do going forward to help retain people. Because as much as recruiting people is important, retention is equally and critically as important. The following slide shows the ratio of our staff's biological gender to their years of service. We have really increased the number of biological women who work for us. I think that's a benefit to creating a unique and equalized working environment. We have a very ethnically diverse staffing. I'm very impressed with the number of people who come and work in our agency, whether their original origins are Russia or Uganda, you name it. We have such a wonderfully diverse staffing cadre. So I just thought this would be helpful. The average years of service is 9.5 years, at least it was when I ran this in October. That is different in my time with the agency where that number had been closer to 15. I'm not judging that as a negative situation, but it is nice to know that the average years of service is 9.5 years once we can get people after that first and third year to stay. Recruiting events. We have made numerous adjustments. This is just a snapshot of the places that we have gone to attempt to recruit people into this mystery called corrections. And we go to high schools, we go to colleges, we bring them in, we take them on tours. We have created a temporary full-time recruiting sergeant for our whole organization. We're going to increase that to 2. We do think that and found that getting our faces out there to talk about what corrections is, what it isn't. We are not a reality TV show. We are much more polished, professional, and interesting than that. And then I think it was important to also show you that our source of hire is generally our staff or other state employees. That's been helpful to know, and that our recruitment team is drawing in about 2%, and that's a new initiative, so that's a new slice of the pie we weren't aware of. If you don't follow us, we're probably on every social media outlet you could possibly imagine, even ones I didn't know existed, but now I do, so good for me. And we publish numerous things both to recognize our staff, unique things about corrections and programs and things that we're doing within the agency. So I would suggest just follow us. It'll be interesting, I promise you. I talked a lot about what happens, or at least our incarcerated population, but the other part of the agency is the Division of Field Services. That is our probation and parole services. Probation is time served on probation. Parole is time served after you've achieved your privilege of release on your minimum sentence. Those are the 2 distinct differences. If you violate probation, that time on probation does not count toward the sentence of violation of probation. You start again. The area of field services is also a collections agency. So if you didn't know, the Department of Corrections has a collections agency, and we collect the court fines and restitution associated with felony level crime, as well as obligations, financial obligations that people incur through the destruction of state property during their incarcerated stay. The probation and parole team also supervises interstate compact agreement. So if you did not know, almost all 50 states are part of a federal commission that actually allows people to transfer their supervision after application and vetting by the receiving state to have their parole supervised. And generally it was their home state. So most people do not receive the opportunity to have their supervision in New Hampshire if they're applying from another state. If they do not have a grounded family or support system in our state, that's square one of the application process. And administrative home confinement is a form of privileged incarceration at home with GPS monitoring that goes through the statutory process that starts evaluating if they've done rehabilitative programming, if they have an appropriate housing situation and supports, they have the likelihood of attaining a job or have a job offer and or are enrolled in an educational program, then I will recommend them for administrative home confinement. And that recommendation goes before the sentencing judge, and the sentencing judge and the prosecuting attorney and defense attorney have time by statute to comment before the ultimately affirming my recommendation or declining it. We've used that in the highest point, 33 cases. I think we have 9 people today out on administrative home confinement. It's not a highly used form of release, primarily because housing is an issue. Finding appropriate housing and stable housing is a barrier to the use of administrative home confinement. As a fun fact, I will let you know that the Governor's Commission on Alcohol and Other Drugs funded a housing program for the judiciary and corrections and drug court participants. It's a fun fact because it's strange that the judiciary is running a housing program for corrections and drug court participants, and was nationally recognized in a drug court conference across the country, and other states are now looking at that program. And through the support of the lead, Rachel, who is over at the judiciary, she's helped house over 400 people post-release from incarceration or participating in drug court. And that's really important because those 400 people could have ended back at the prison, and we really don't want people to come back. The field services caseload as our incarcerated population has also been decreasing. So that's what the following slide starts to show you. The blue line is probation. So the most number of people out on community supervision is probation. That orange line is parole supervision. You're going to see new elements in the FY22 and FY23, and those are to denote the inclusion of fugitives, people who have absconded from supervision. The other bar graphs, going back further, they're embedded in either probation or parole. And we really wanted to give a clean lens on who we're supervising in New Hampshire, that we know where they are, and that we don't know where some people are, simply said. And you'll see that conversation I had about administrative home confinement. That's the smallest number across those years. And then the New Hampshire non-supervised is that interstate compact conversation I had with you a moment ago. So good things are happening. We're using less of the incarcerated system and less of the supervision system in New Hampshire, so we have to be doing something right. Now, I haven't done the full analysis, and it would be interesting to do one to see what have we been doing right over the last 10 years, above and beyond what I stated, because we are doing something right. We do several things right, but it's happening also in this area. On the following slide, when I took on the responsibility of commissioner, I include this slide as simple as vehicles, because as simple as vehicles, our agency needs the resources to do the things I've talked about. And our probation and parole officers have been under outfitted with vehicles. So I've spent from 2017 to today within our existing budget to increase their fleet from 19 to 23. And it may not seem like a lot, but it is enough. It's going to keep heading in that direction, because you can't send people out in the community to supervise if you don't have a vehicle to go do it in. It's just reality. The other thing I started working on is actually increasing their caseload. And you'll see on the narrative on the car slide, I talk about not increasing their caseload, increasing the staff to facilitate their caseload. So in the budgeting process in 18, I asked for 4 new probation and parole officers. I was fortunate to attain 2. And we deployed those to equalize the ratio of probation and parole officers to the cases that they were managing. In looking at the agency's vacancy, because in the next budgeting phase, it really wasn't a time to ask for new staff. So I looked at our existing long-term vacancies and made a decision to use the personnel process to take those vacancies and turn those into additional probation and parole officers. So what you'll see is the ratio adjustments that occurred on the following slide deck to help create us more in line with the National Institute of Corrections standards for probation and parole supervision. So we're making strides in the right direction so that we have proper supervision levels out in the community. And then recidivism, if that is a new word for you, it is a fancy word to say that 3 years after their release from incarceration, they came back to New Hampshire incarceration. We don't like high recidivism numbers, but we have to understand what they are if we're going to make a difference in helping people stay in New Hampshire communities. So if you look at 2018 from 2017, there are things we know were going on in the state of New Hampshire, and that is the opioid epidemic. Our individuals are affected by substance use disorder at a higher rate than the average neighbor, citizen, person in New Hampshire. And we saw the rate for men increase significantly as far as recidivism in 2018, because that's 3 years after they left. So they left in 2018 when we watched them for 3 years after that. You might ask me, Commissioner, why did the women's number not go up? Why did it go down? We were fortunate to receive state opioid response dollars from our partners at Health and Human Services to deploy a pilot project. And that project was to partner people voluntarily post-release with what we coined a reentry care coordinator. And they followed women who had opioid use disorder 1 year post-release and functioned as, I would equate it to a healthcare navigator, a navigator to remove barriers and help them connect to whatever resources are going to help stabilize them in the community, whether it's a treatment provider, or they're having challenges with housing, do we need to help have navigate daycare? And it made a difference, and it continued to make a difference. So in 2019, we were provided an opportunity to add 2 more reentry care coordinators through the same funding for men. So as I continue to look at our recidivism numbers, I expect that number to be better, but we are still challenged with substance use disorder and its impacts on individuals who we're supervising out in the community. And the small little chart below, I'll send this to you electronically so you can read the tiny little writing underneath, are the hearings outcome from our adult parole board. I'll also take this opportunity to tell you, I do not supervise the adult parole board. The adult parole board is managed out of the governor's office and is a separate partner for the agency to as a neutral party to examine the opportunities to grant privileges of parole or violations of parole. And in their review of cases, the bar chart underneath shows that the reasons people violate parole in the top 3 are issues associated with drug and alcohol use. So I don't think that should be surprising, but it's an area we have to continue to target. And then the 3rd rule violation has to do with unstable housing, unstable employment, and moving throughout the state. It's almost always a combination of these rule violations. It's not generally just one. If it is generally just one, it's because they've engaged in actual additional criminal contact or criminal engagement in the community, and they've been arrested. The following slide is what I would hope you would go to the annual report and learn more about, but here's a little snapshot of pictures of things we've done to implement new programming called Choose Love. We've taken what's been deployed in our school systems in New Hampshire, worked with the partners to afford it and equal it to an adult learning curricula, and it's been well received and made a really wonderful impact with women. We started with Women First, and now we've deployed it to our men's programming. Gives you a summary. CTEC is our Career and Technical Education Center. We are part of the correctional organizations who have been approved and have partners for the reauthorization of the Second Chance Pell Grant that will start in July 1. Our technical community partners are White Mountain Community College and NHTI here in Concord. So we'll continue down that road. I only have 2 more to go. Victim Services. Bet you didn't know we had a Victim Services Bureau, but we do. We support victims and survivors of felony level crime here in New Hampshire, and this is a summary. We are on the cusp of deploying and being part of the VINE automated notification system that many of our county jail partners have already had, and we did that through our federal funding for victim services. So that will be moving forward and making it really a self-service model, how you want to be notified about that person who's affected your life. Email, phone call, text, you name it. If you want a hard copy letter, you'll still get that. And the following slide is to give you a sense. In 1 month, there are thousands of individuals we're supporting, whether it's supporting through our Bureau of Victim Services, whether the person is incarcerated, probation, or parole. So we do that across the gamut. And I did put that we've collected $1.1 million in restitution and obligations at the time of publishing this PowerPoint. And then on the last slide is my media marketing attempt to tell you, please follow us on all of these social media platforms. I thank you for your patience. It's been a long morning, and happy to answer questions and or follow up with you, because this was just a snapshot of what we do.
Thank you, Commissioner Hanks. You obviously put a lot of effort into this, and we really appreciate your time and the information. Having been on this committee and served for a few years now, I really appreciate the innovative methods you've taken to help these folks get on the straight path.
Thank you, sir.
I'd be interested in talking to you later about setting up a field trip for any of the members of the committee who would like to go and take a tour and see what's going on at both the men's and women's facilities, so that we have an idea and can actually see the people that these laws affect and impact. Just a couple quick questions I have. Your recruitment, I noticed on the list of colleges, you didn't have any state schools. Do you go to UNH, or do you have any issues with the state schools getting in there or anything like that?
That was just, thank you for that question. That was just a short list. We go to UNH,
Okay.
you name it, we're trying to be there.
Very awesome.
We also work with our partners at Employment Security as well.
Okay. And I've asked this of a couple of other presenters. How's the homeless situation in this state impacting? I mean, are some people not having difficulty leaving the system because they have nowhere to go? I mean, do you see people coming into the system that are there for crimes that really they just needed a place to live?
That's a challenging question, and I will give you sort of short two answers. That housing program we've partnered with the judiciary has helped us on the helping prevent people's return, but also helping find stable housing, because it's not just here's your housing for a couple of months and we walk away. The program is designed to give you housing and then long-term housing stability. So I think we've been really fortunate to be able to pilot and continue to receive funding for that program. We actually asked for more money from the Governor's Commission that was granted to us to continue to expand that opportunity. With that said, I will tell you, we do not automatically violate someone's probation and or parole if they lose their housing. We do not want the state corrections agency to be the default housing. We will only look to violations if it's associated with public safety around crime, criminal activity, significant substance use, relapse. So I can't solidly answer your other question about community-based homelessness other than to say that you'll see corrections at what you wouldn't expect in the community. I was recently at the City of Concord's collaborative discussion on homelessness, specifically in Concord. You'll see the Commissioner of Corrections at meetings on education. You'll see us at treatment because we have all of those issues, but it's a challenging question. I mean, housing is hard for the person who's working every day not involved in the justice system.
I agree. Thank you. Any questions? Oh, we have a lot. Okay. Representative Muse.
Just wanted a quick update on where we stand with the secure psychiatric unit.
Thank you for that question, Representative Muse. We continue to function under the existing statute. The department does operate the secure psychiatric unit. It is a mix of individuals, not mixed in their housing, but a mix of services for people who are civilly committed under specific statutes and those who have exceeded our capacity to support them in our regular prison environment. So it's a mix of sentenced adults and civilly committed individuals. The latter, that being sentenced adult, is actually the primary population we treat in the secure psychiatric unit, but we're poised to hand over everybody civilly committed as soon as the new forensic hospital is built, and I don't have a clear timeline on when that's happening, but I do think it's important to share with this committee the secure psychiatric unit that the Department of Corrections runs. The service need for corrections won't go away, so we'll still use that building. And embedded in that building in a separate wing is the residential treatment unit, which provides for up to 40 adult males opportunity for treatment for their mental illness. So it's a complex building that we'll continue to use once the forensic hospital is built and HHS takes that portion over. I will look to our partners over at HHS to send you a timeline, Representative Muse.
I just want to interject with a question that I forgot to ask. Regarding the opioid crisis, you get handed a lot of individuals who are currently addicted. How do you deal with that? Getting them the medical help, obviously, they're going to need when they're coming off of these drugs. How is that working out and the challenges around that, if you just could
Thank
briefly?
you for that question. That's an important question. Individuals who come to our department who, upon booking, our officers are trained to identify, but in the first short hours that someone's there, a member of our nursing team also triages. We triage for suicidality, symptoms of detox, things of that nature. We have medical professionals who work for us, who work with our nursing staff to provide medically monitored detoxification in our infirmary spaces. I want to make it clear, when I say infirmary, I am not a hospital. If somebody needs hospital level of care, we take them to the hospital, but infirmary is more for pre, post-op, or things we can manage and we know we can safely manage in our infirmary settings. So we've had, since prior to 2011, medically assisted detoxification. We also have a robust treatment for people with opioid use disorder through medication. We are not licensed to dispense methadone, but we have all the other methods of medication. And when we primarily use methadone, it's with women who are pregnant and have opioid use disorder, and we work with a partnering agency to facilitate that. But we have buprenorphine, naltrexone, naloxone. We do Narcan. We do all of those things. We do the injectables. And I've been very proud that the agency's been ahead of that, and we continue to advance. And I would also say that the recently published federal act that removed the waiver requirements for providers and the patient caps on caseloads has been a game changer for corrections and will really help us increase our capacity to treat those with opioid use disorder. We have hundreds of individuals who are receiving medications associated with treating opioid use disorder today. Thanks.
Kelly? Got it.
Thank you. I have two questions, if that's okay. So the first is that Justice Broderick has, in many speeches, talked about how our prison system is probably the greatest provider of mental health care. I'm wondering whether you see a pathway to avoid the need for the correctional system if there were better access to mental health care in some capacity. That's my first question.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I've actually heard him talk, and he and I talk frequently. The department says this. You heard me, I support drug court, mental health court. I expect that diversion opportunity is vetted at that level. But we also and will provide the mental health treatment for people who have been deemed that despite having a mental health disorder, their criminogenic issues are so significant they need incarceration. For us, we look to what can we do to reduce the person returning, and then learn about other things the state could implement on that diversion side. So with that, I would also share with you that I actually sit on a committee through the judiciary and our Chief Justice to look at other opportunities that we might not be exploring as a state with other collaborative partners, including a retired NAMI leader, Ken Norton, and others, to say, what else can we do that we haven't flipped that stone over? And I do think housing is important. Housing is so important that we have to overcome that as a state-based issue.
May I ask my second question? Okay. So my second question actually has to do with housing and employment. So to what extent do you partner organizations for housing and employment for people who have served time for felonies? Because I know, at least in the county level, finding places that are willing to accept people who've served time to either for employment or housing is incredibly difficult.
That's a great question. And again, I already referenced the program we started in 2018, but I also, on behalf of the governor, chair the Commission on Mental Illness and the Correction System. And with that, the New Hampshire Housing Authority, Rob, he sits on that commission. And a lot of things we're talking about that we can all participate in, whatever your investment is on the federal restrictions around affordable housing that almost automatically exclude people from using those opportunities. Those are in print. And then there are your local housing regulations that the state doesn't peel down into, and you as leaders in your areas can work at a local level to try to peel some of those back and invite us to come to your communities to talk about what the myths of including those prevent, because having people at risk who are homeless only makes them more at risk. So there are things we can do locally that we have control over that remove exclusions from affordable housing locally. I'm cognizant to say that I already said housing is an issue for people who aren't even justice involved. So when justice involved people are competing for that same housing, who's going to win? And the Department of Corrections does not want to run apartment buildings. We want to stay where we belong, and partner with the people who should be running those apartment buildings, houses, townhouses. I don't mean to imply that people coming out of corrections should only be in an apartment, but housing is so critical.
First of all, I am so happy to hear you say that the MAD Act is a game changer, because I was one of a whole bunch of people who advocated for that and was very happy to see that passed.
Thank you.
As part of the omnibus.
Thank you for your support.
Absolutely, I'm going to share that. I hope you don't mind.
Please.
I guess I'll ask right now.
Yeah.
I'm a homeless advocate. I work at a homeless shelter, a transitional homeless shelter. I'm sure you were sitting here, so you heard that before. What I'm curious about is, we provide kind of wraparound services. Number one, is that part of the judiciary funded program, the housing program?
Yes.
Number two, what kind of resources, wraparound services are available to people? And I'm curious, I'm sorry, it's a three-part question, I guess. I'm curious about the length of stay, average length of stay.
An incarcerated stay.
Yeah.
Okay. So your three-part question.
Sorry,
That's okay.
it's a lot.
No, I will send you a copy of the document that outlines what we do with the judiciary, because it does talk in detail about the wraparound services, and then everybody will have that information. And I think that's also the reason it's been successful. We, the agency, provide case managers and other service individuals, depending on the person, to help reentry plan for everyone departing corrections. And I will also take my commissioner pitch to say Medicaid expansion was a game changer in 2014. That individuals prior to that leaving corrections, we wrapped all of these services, and we're not cheap. We're general fund dollars around a person, and they had no insurance connectivity to maintain those services. So when authorization happened in August of 2014, we had a pathway to continue people's medication. We had a pathway to find them a primary care provider. We had a pathway to intervene, to reduce or intervene and make sure people don't come back to incarceration. So everything we can do to stabilize people, and I've worked with Director Littman, Henry Littman, who's our Director of Medicaid, to make sure that justice-involved persons are still part of that conversation. So please reauthorize Medicaid expansion. Corrections is begging you to do that. The other part that becomes important, and relative to your question, is the state requested from the federal government an addition in our Medicaid waiver this time around, and it was to target services 45 days prior to the date of release. And those services that we're hoping the federal government will agree with us are to reduce people's use of emergency room services and other crisis services, because we're asking for them to cover, through Medicaid dollars, an appointment with a peer-to-peer recovery specialist, an appointment with with their first primary care, whatever that primary care is. If it's a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner, or if it's their general practitioner, we want to get that face-to-face started. Because there's one thing about human beings: if we meet the person we're supposed to go see in 30 days, we actually have this thing called guilt if we don't show up. So that's incorporated in the state's Medicaid waiver. It went through a lot of support from state partners that I didn't even anticipate. And then the federal government has looked at our waiver, so we're literally just waiting for an answer from the Centers of Medicaid and Medicare Services. So that's also my pitch, to say, please reach out to our federal partners, ask them to support New Hampshire's 1115A waiver, and I'll also make sure you get a copy of it. We're trying to build those bridges to reduce people's return and to really wrap services around. And our expectation is it could happen face-to-face, but we're also practical. It's likely those are going to happen in a telehealth type encounter. Third part was average length of stay. Oh, I almost had it. Thank you, sir. It used to be 3.5 to 7 years was the average sentence structure. That has increased a bit. It's now looking more like it's 5 to 10, but I'm going to go back to what I said before. A lot of that is because we have a lot of men incarcerated for violations of sexual assault. With that, I will tell you that the provisions afforded people under the Earned Time Credit Law do have a positive rehabilitative impact both on them and their sentence structure. And when the judges check the box on the sentencing minimus that give them that opportunity, it starts to adjust that minimum and maximum depending on the person's investment in rehabilitative programming. Thank you for those questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question about the prison environment, and I wonder if you could go into a little bit about what the environment of these 3 prisons are, and is it calm? Is it dangerous and violent? What is the environment in the prisons like?
Representative Wheeler, that is a complex question. I would say that the environment is dependent on which unit you're housed on, and here's why. We've purposely created some modified therapeutic communities and taken over whole housing units and said, if you want to voluntarily go live on this wellness unit, because you're all 74 of you are invested in your own wellness, the quality of culture on that unit is different. They're already self-motivated. And when you go on that unit, which I hope you have an opportunity to do so, they say to me, Commissioner, it's a little weird in here. I don't want to scare you, but I don't feel like I'm in prison. And I said, I'm glad you don't, because I need us all to remember you have a second chance on life, and we need you to think about your future. And then we have other programs called the Focus Unit. It is not an acronym. It's capital F. It is a modified therapeutic community that targets substance use disorder. The climate on that's a little differently. Yes, they're motivated to be there, but we've actually, in some instances, held back disciplinary infractions and said, we want to highly motivate you to go there. So you have some people who raise their hand and some people who avoid disciplinary infractions to go there. So it's still therapeutic, but a different environment. And we also have the realism that we literally have security threat groups in our institutions, also known as gangs, who we are trying to thwart their criminal conduct within our correctional environment. So to your question, is it dangerous? Yes, it can be incredibly dangerous. Is every day incredibly dangerous? It has the potential to be dangerous. And one of the highest diverted pieces of contraband right now is fentanyl-laced paper. And paper that has been soaked in synthetic cannabinoids. And we also found paper soaked in cocaine. And so our staff at corrections in our mailroom have personal protective equipment, not just because of COVID-19, but because we're asking them to touch paper. We went to photocopying, I will call casual mail, and now we have to figure out what to do with legal mail, because contraband legal mail is the other venue in which we're experiencing. So I give you a flavor of that because it depends on where you are in the organization and the institutions.
I have a quick question about what you just said. Do you work with the postal inspector to follow up on these crimes?
Oh, we do.
And it sounds like it's like a night flashback to the '60s, acid soaking paper. And is that what's going on there?
Yeah, when we change practice to divert something, somebody always finds some other way to do it.
Yeah, there's always a new mousetrap,
Yep.
isn't there?
Yep.
Okay. Representative Newman.
Thank you. I just have a quick question about the Northern Correctional Facility and the regional men's prison. Do you have the same responsibility, and are they similar in atmosphere and whatnot?
Yes. The Northern Correctional Facility is under the purview of the Department of Corrections and the New Hampshire State Prison for Men as well. And the policies implemented by the Department of Corrections are consistent across all sites. With one minor exception, we may do something that is gender-centric for women and or men. That would be the only deviation. And the Northern Correctional Facility for Men does not have a robust special housing unit. That is our most restrictive housing unit. It has a few cells that we would use as a transitional location before we would send somebody down to the men's prison if they engaged in conduct that would result in that.
Follow up? Yeah, and just as far as your staffing go, I know you talked about the minimum wage. Is there a retirement system? Is it the state retirement system? How does that work?
That's a great question. So the changes in retirement, some people will say that when it switched from 20 years to 25 years, we lost some people. I think we saw that statistically. The new group of individuals coming in will say to you, I have to work 80 hours a week as base pay to get to equalized pay of my other law enforcement partner who's doing and meets the same minimum certification requirements. And why is that the case? So we have to get equalized pay for equalized certification. But we literally need more people to come and be interested in being corrections officers.
And it's a defined benefit pension, is that correct? A defined benefit, they get a payment based upon the years of service.
Yeah, just the same retirement system laws that are on the books today, depending on your date of hire.
I think that's, people have to understand. I
Yeah.
myself have a pension, and the pension is a very big driver when people get to the point where they get into retirement, because it's really, really a big thing.
It is. And the changes from last legislative cycle, if I recall correctly, that adjusted how that calculation happened was to the benefit of the staff that work in the Department of Corrections. Those were positive changes. I will tell you when, and I'm not trying to tell you what to do, certainly would never do that. When the retirement laws are opened in bills, it scares all of my staff. So I have to work on what they say, what is the legislature trying to do? And I said, we're going to have to wait and find out.
And we do too.
Thank you.
Representative Jambrin.
There we go. Thank you, Commissioner, for coming today. You know, I reckon back to my years in college when I studied criminal justice with a few of your probation and parole officers that were my instructors. I remember early during the pandemic, there was National Guardsmen that were called to assist your department.
Yes.
If you could just comment on the services they provided, if they're still there, and if you have a current need for them as well.
Thank you for that question. COVID-19 are the toughest 2 years of my career for the reasons that make sense. And COVID-19 not only affected everyone's life and people got to work from home, my staff did not get to work from home. They had to continue to come to work. But with that said, COVID-19 affected their families. So did we have people that themselves as employees were affected by COVID-19 infection? Yes. But then their families were affected by the illness. So when we started to look at the numbers of people who were literally out of the office, either for their own illness or supporting their families, it did trigger my ask to the governor to bring in members of the National Guard to supplement our security forces. We use them differently in New Hampshire than they were used in other states. Other states put National Guard service members all over the place in different posts. We made a purposeful decision through collaboration with the Attorney General's office, myself, the National Guard, and the Governor's office to put them in posts that did not put them in the direct supervision of people incarcerated, because that is a unique expertise. And then also working with Director Skippa over at Police Standards and Training Council to put them through a course of curricula that would help orient them to those roles. So to your answer, we put them in non-direct positions within the organization, perimeter security, control rooms, things of that nature. And we would not have made it through those times without the National Guard support. So we've used them twice, and we don't have any National Guard service members in the organization right now, but I am constantly monitoring what is going on and if I have to make that ask. And those individuals that were assigned to us came from the National Guard with military policing experience and were picked specifically for their career backgrounds.
And as a follow-up to that, were you able to recruit any of those National Guards members for your staff? I know that the military police are actually on the Texas border, so.
Yeah, I tried. I tried. And we are a veterans-friendly employer, so we are connected in that way. I'll try to recruit anybody. I have no shame.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's going to have to be it. We're way behind. Oh, you have a question? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thank you for taking my question.
Of course. Uh-huh. I would just, again, thank you for that. That was literally just a snapshot from September to November. If I gave you the whole list of the places we've been for the last probably 2 years, it would cover the whole slide deck. We have been down to those areas. Pursuant to that question, and I know we're all out of time, if there are opportunities that you think we might not be aware of, please let us know. We'll send somebody. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, again, thank you so much. I encourage everyone to get the commissioner's contact information. They're very responsive over there at getting back to you. We will see her again, I'm sure. And I would reach out to you regarding the potential for visits as the session goes on. Thank you again so much.
Thank you for your service to the state, everyone.
And next, with my extreme apologies, I will call the representative from the state police. it appears you got off the hook. Oh, what was it? I didn't even see it. Go ahead.
I know. Thank you for taking my question. Last year, I know they talked a little about driving basically while high. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about how you determine that or make that assumption that someone is high versus
So, I mean, just
alcohol?
like any other traffic stop, observations will be made prior to a stop, during an interaction with an individual, and an officer will be looking for signs of impairment during that interaction that he has with the driver. If the typical over the years, the impaired drivers due to alcohol use. There will be different things that officers are looking for, that they can testify to, that they've observed, and observations that are made. Drugs, different drugs, there's a lot of the same impairment that shows, but there may be some more specific things. We have drug recognition experts throughout the state, state police as well as local departments, that may be asked to come in and do an evaluation with the whole program for the DRE program, training that they receive, and what they're able to observe with a certain individual that may be impaired by drugs. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. Follow up? Okay. So if you think someone is impaired, okay, on a stop, do you call someone out to that location, or that's a situation where you're going to take that person in?
The police officer makes observations, and if it rises to the point where they believe they have probable cause to make an arrest, they will arrest that individual, and then they will be responsible for follow-up in court, presenting that evidence. There are opportunities for the individual to continue their cooperation through breath tests, the evaluation with a drug recognition expert, things to that effect. Just as the officer tends to be building their case. Sometimes these interactions are a result of a motor vehicle accident. There may be injuries involved, and there are more steps that can be taken to appropriately gather the evidence that's needed for the case.
Thank you.
Just
Representative Newell.
Thank you. Just one quick question as a follow-up on what she was speaking about. So what you're saying is, I'm wondering if I missed something in this. So of course there would be the, I forget what she said it was, but an officer who is trained to identify, right? But somewhere in between the initial encounter and that assessment, that's on the street assessment, and going to court for something, are you saying that the evidence presented would be the person's assessment, the expert's assessment, or wouldn't there be a test in the meantime to?
It could be. Yeah. So we were talking about the immediate,
Right.
vehicle stop, right, where an officer is making their observations. They are, applying the laws as they should for that interaction. There's opportunities for, like I said, breath tests, potentially blood tests, and potentially a drug recognition expert giving making their observations and giving the tests that they give, and then all that information will be gathered and brought to court later if it goes to that level.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I didn't hear anything about the test. I'm going, that seems like it would be important. Thank you.
And I'm really pleased to see the members engaging and asking all these questions. I'm going to try and arrange for the opportunity for ride-alongs with everyone, with either the state police or local police. It's still in the planning stages, so you'll be able to see what it looks like firsthand. And I hope you all avail yourselves of that once we get it set up. One more question? Go ahead, Representative Reed.
So, when somebody's stopped for DUI, you have the breathalyzer test. There's no test yet for other substances like marijuana. You don't have a breathalyzer or on the spot test for that currently, correct?
Thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you shortly, I'm sure. And last but most definitely not least, the Executive Director, Sarah Rothmana of the New Hampshire Public Defenders. Thank you. You said that in the upcoming budget, you had requested a certain amount. What will that set your hourly rate at if you were? Mhm.
The rates went to $90 an hour and 120 for the serious cases. I just had some legal work done personally, and I paid $450 an hour.
Yeah.
And so you can see we can't as a state even begin to match those rates, but those are the rates we just got passed. And I want to say, in terms of competitiveness, they're decently competitive in the league. So going from 60 to $90 is competitive. It just may not be competitive in this moment, in this housing market, in this labor market, and in this health insurance market. But it is the race, and they've finally moved it. So private attorneys would get paid that rate. We have the contract attorney program where we've made some adjustments. They're not quite as high. So we've done just more with that.
Yeah, I was just curious to see if what you submitted for your budget request, if it would get you where you would like to be, or at least in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm.
And the governor has acknowledged that, knows it's in our budget request, and it was consulted before the rates were raised. I mean, no one was going to raise rates and then, not be able to. There was a discussion about that going forward.
Okay.
Again, thinking about what that is. My plumber replaced the pump the other day was $175. I was delighted to have it.
Questions from the committee? Representative Sitek.
Do you mind sticking around for a minute? I have some questions that I don't want to tie up the committee. And in the words of one of your clients, you're pretty good at this, Ms. Rafflet.
And they are very good at this. Again, if we don't have proper representation, people that are well-trained, cases get remanded back for refile because of ineffective assistance of counsel. It is a standard that we have to meet. And the rates we're paying, we're lucky we get it close.
Representative Jammern? Oh, you wanted to follow up? Go ahead.
As a point of information, Salem High School is paying its Latin teacher 70 grand.
If all these things are relative to what we have resources, the priorities we have to set.
Representative Jammern.
I recall from my 4 years on the committee that's on the other side of that, on that other room over there, that what we're talking about here is an individual's constitutional right to representation. And to put a cost on that is pretty difficult. But my recollection is there is, if the person is able to afford it, a requirement for them to pay for those services. And that is actually collected by probation and parole. Is that correct? Yeah. Oh, yes, I remember them. Right. Right. And it never, ever will actually meet what you have spent in their defense.
No, he likes to hear himself.
I agree.
Representative Saling.
Thank you so much. you spoke a bit about some of the challenges for public defenders. I'm wondering if there's funding for and support for mental health services to ensure their ability to continue doing their jobs effectively.
Thank you. First of all, thank you. I appreciate what you do so much. I wanted to ask, uh, I have had experiences with trying to assist people with who have a public defender in other states, and it's been not a good experience. You keep talking about the idea of you want to have the quality of representation. I appreciate that so much, and I believe that you do. And I'm curious what you might think. I guess this is more of a subjective question, but what do you think is kind of the difference and why that happens? Is it, how is it that you are able to provide this quality of care service? And I know the priorities and things like that. I think that that's wonderful. I'm just curious what your impression is.
Representative Newman.
Thank you. I'm just trying, do you have any comments? And what I'm trying to figure out is who can apply for this? What kind of financial stuff do they take into consideration? And once you've made the decision that someone is either qualified or not qualified, is the qualified individual then on their own and they just go find representation in the private community, or how does that all work? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It has been very enlightening, and thank you for responding to my invitation. And if you have any information you'd like to hand out or pass on or anything throughout the year, feel free to reach out to us. And thank you very much. So I just want to briefly address the committee because I didn't have a chance to before we started. As we noticed today, it was very informal and we all got to ask our questions, and that's the way I like to conduct hearings. If we can all do that civilly, I would plan on continuing that way for the rest of the year. Just everyone, if you have a follow-up question, make sure you say follow-up, please. I noticed someone, I'm not going to mention anyone, stuck like 7 questions in one of their questions. But I would like to be able to continue the way we did it. This was really good. It was really informative. So let's, if we can all play nice together, that's the way we're going to continue. And if any of you have any questions for me, I'm happy to take them. There will be a schedule coming out shortly. We will be having 3 meetings next week on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We have a lot of bills. It's looking like we're going to be somewhere around between 85 and 90. And I don't want to be here in June. I don't know about you. So we're going to crank through these as best we can, and we'll get our work done. Representative Bolden, you had a question?
Actually, a request.
Sure.
Between the 7 questions and a question and then not saying follow-up, I was wondering if maybe just off the top of your head, if you could, because we have so many new people on the committee who are first timers, I mean, if you could run through your expectations for how to conduct yourself in committee in general, I think it might be helpful.
Sure. I would expect everyone to just make sure you, if you want to ask a question, raise your hand, wait till you're recognized. If you have a follow-up, just go ahead and put your hand up. I will universally, almost 100% of the time, allow a follow-up question. When we have witnesses testifying, I expect the questions to be pertinent and germane, something that you really want to know the answer to, that you will think will help the rest of the committee make a decision. I don't want to see gotcha questions. There's generally a rule regarding electronic items during hearings. I'm not going to be really ridiculous about that either. But if I see people Googling stuff on a laptop or a phone to give gotcha questions to the witness, then I'm going to have to enforce that. If you need it just to look at text to see if someone's texting you or a kid, you got to take a phone call. I'm going to be flexible about that. As long as we can all get our business done, then that's good. Let me see what else. Did I miss anything?
What about the would you believes?
Oh, yeah. What would we call the would you believes? Yeah, don't ask questions that you already know the answer to, just so that the rest of us can hear what you already know. That would be, would you believe that I already know this answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway? Please don't do those. Let me see what else. Representative Newman, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question about, I've been thinking about electronic equipment and use it and how you use it or abuse it. But you can use your phone to get the text of bills that come up that you don't have a paper copy for. And,
Oh, sure, yeah,
and stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
But it's much easier to observe on a computer. So I don't know if computers are verboten or what, because that's
Computers are a bit much. If we're all sitting behind laptops, it's just kind of disrespectful to the witness.
okay. Well,
It just doesn't, it's not a good look for all of us. If you have a tablet, you can put that in
okay,
your lap.
I'll
But
do it.
having a computer screen
No,
between you and
I just think it's much easier to do that,
Sure.
and if a tablet is being used in
Yeah,
in an
yeah.
inconspicuous manner
Yes,
to
that's
get
right.
information, because you might go back and be looking at something that you've written up for this already or whatever.
Sure. It's important that we treat each other with respect. I'd like to forget about parties when we're in here. I really, really would. This is about criminal justice. So I'm going to try my best to do that. And if we all do that together, it'll be really cool. But above respect for each other, I want to make sure that we show respect for the witnesses. Regardless if they say the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard, you smile and you let them say their piece. They came here to talk to you. Some of them traveled a long, long way to get here. And we have the respect to listen to them, and that's fine, and move to the next subject. And that's how, above all, that's one of the things that's going to make me use this ridiculous hammer is talking to disrespectfully to a witness.
I just
I'll get a
want,
better
I
one.
just, I just wanted to ask about
Sure.
the first two words you said you want to forget about.
Yeah.
Before you started, I did not hear what you said.
Party affiliation.
Party.
We're a team in here. We're our own party.
I think I got party, but I didn't know whether
Yeah.
I
We-
didn't know whether you were talking about just
For
a
the
party
best of-
party or
Yeah, well,
political
that's at
party.
the end of the year. But while we're in here, I'd like to be the criminal justice party. So if, and I know that's not reasonable to every extent, but the best we can. Representative Bolden.
While we were here today, we got 2 notices for upcoming. Oh, okay. So 18th and 19th. And so I was wondering if you have a sense of how frequently each week will be meeting and what days.
Generally, it's going to be Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. Right now, I want it. We have, as you know, we have those first bills that have the financial implications we have to take care of first. So we may have 3 days a week just to get those out of the way. And I'd like to be able to go back to 2, and which would be
Weekly?
yeah,
3
yeah.
days a week. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, weekly for at least a few weeks.
Yeah, yeah, and then I'd like to go back if I can to just Wednesday, Thursdays. Nobody wants to be here on Friday, but we got to do what we got to do because we share this room with Ways and Means.
And is it? I'm sorry. Follow up.
No, go ahead.
Is it your expectation that on the vacation weeks that we'll still be having hearings?
I don't want to. If we can, that's why you're going to see a heavy schedule coming up. I don't want to because I know people want to spend time with their kids and their grandkids, and I don't want to be here either. But we have to do what we have to do. So if we put in the time now, maybe we can avoid the vacation weeks. Last one, Amanda.
Last one. Anything else I wonder about? I'll just
Email
talk
me.
to myself at home. So on weeks when there's session
Yep.
and it's like on a Thursday and it's one day, are we meeting? Do you think the Wednesday before or just not at all on those weeks?
No, I would think the Wednesday before. I don't think we have the luxury of taking off a whole week if we want the vacation weeks off. So, yep. Representative Murray.
I just wanted to confirm that I'm okay to take notes on like an iPad or something like that.
Sure. The one thing I will ask, I really would appreciate if no one's live tweeting our meetings. You know, you can tweet later. You can bash Republicans all you want, bash Democrats. Don't bash our committee and don't bash each other, especially when we're trying to work together. So live tweeting, I wish you wouldn't. But checking emails, whatever you got to do, that's fine. That's true. Just today was super informal. It will be a little bit more informal when we're having a public hearing. A little more formal when we're having actual public hearings. But as I said, I'm going to try to keep it as relaxed as possible because also one other thing I want to mention, I'm going to try and arrange as many field trips as possible and as many guest speakers as possible. I think informed legislators are better legislators. And a lot of times hearing about something, reading about something, or even seeing something in old episodes of Law and Order are not quite as good as going to court and sitting there and watching defendants be brought up and put in the dock and having an attorney represent them and what's all involved in that, or a ride along or a visit to the prison. They'll be strictly, obviously, voluntary. I'm not going to insist anyone go, but I will try and make the opportunity there for you all. Representative Murray?
When there is a public hearing, are we expected to like stay here in our seats the entirety of like while people are speaking, or are you allowed to get up if necessary?
If you have to use the restroom, by all means, please do. Just try to be, if there's a witness testifying, just try to keep yourself as inconspicuous as possible so as not to distract from them. Representative Salig.
I just wanted to support your idea about going for a ride along. I did that last year or 2 years ago with the Laconia Police Department. I went with 2 separate officers.
Mhm.
And I would encourage people, if you schedule a ride along with the department, to, first of all, not necessarily do it in your town because it's really embarrassing when you pull over your friends. But also to seek out the opportunity to go with more than one person. The 2 officers that happened to take me had very, very dramatically different views of policing where one viewed as an opportunity for connections, and the other was eager to find as many people as he could to cite during the time we were together.
I will be trying to arrange it through the state police and potentially Concord or Manchester. I don't think coming out to the, you call it, community of Deerfield, where I live, is going to really give you an idea or a flavor of what's going on in policing in New Hampshire. So I'll try and make that available to everyone, and as the weeks go by, we'll figure that out. But thank you, I appreciate that. Representative Newman.
And I just have a suggestion. Maybe you could have more microphones at the
That's
at the
definitely a good
desk,
call,
and,
yeah.
and then make sure that they're on when the testimony is given, because I haven't got my hearing aids yet, but I need them.
Okay. And those thingies over there are actually kind of annoying. I got to figure out that. I can't see the witnesses. I think they're speakers. I don't know why they have to be like up at face level. Okay, that's it. If you have any more questions, email me whenever you want. Please give your contact information to your majority leader so that I can get in touch with you if there's any last minute changes, storms, what have you. And that'll be it. Thank you.